world calls for wet work, and we answer. No greater good. No just cause. God. Cypher sent us to hell. But we're going even deeper.
Metal Gear Solid 5 is a masterpiece of stealth gameplay and action. It has some of the strongest gameplay in the series, and combines that stealth with mechanics and systems that tie together and build each other up. It's a massive game, and it's both easy to replay and easy to put a ton of time into. But it also has an incredible story, filled with unique themes, old themes that are dealt with in new ways, and a lot to say about its characters. It's noticeably darker and a bit more cynical than the rest of the series, but it was originally billed as the answer to how Big Boss fell into evil. The new characters that are introduced are interesting enough to hold their own, the old characters are developed enough to draw our attention once again, and their interactions and words are strong enough to have an impact. The game is both fun and incredibly sad, both something you want to keep playing and something you want to shut off. It's this dynamic that makes the game feel like one of the most interesting entries in the series. And a lot of Metal Gear Solid 5 is wrapped up in its own mysteries, ones that won't be answered or fulfilled until the latter half of the game. It takes that classic Metal Gear formula of giving you all the answers right at the end and uses it to its benefit. But it's a game that shifts and changes as you proceed through its narrative, and by the time you finish it, you look at the story and its characters in a completely different way. Metal Gear Solid 5 is one of my favorite games in the series, so today I'll be taking a deep dive into this game. I'll be talking about gameplay, mechanics, story, and everything in between. If you haven't seen my previous videos on the series, I would highly recommend watching those now. Each of those videos is meant to represent a distinct era in the series' history. A lot of my analysis for this game is based on the others and the development of the series so far. Also, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like and subscribe to the channel as it really helps me out. You can also support me over on Patreon, where I provide updates on the channel and early access to my videos. As a general rule, if I start talking about a game, expect me to spoil it. It's me, your favorite son, and today I'd like to talk about Metal Gear Solid 5. This video is brought to you by Manscaped.com, the global men's lifestyle brand that is revolutionizing the landscape of men's grooming. They're at the forefront, showing their ongoing dominance in providing top-notch quality and unmatched value as we jump into their newest offer, the Performance Package 5.0 Ultra, featuring the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra electric trimmer. With the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra, they've taken grooming precision to a whole new level with their next-gen dual skin-safe blade heads. And if you're ready to level up your grooming game, then say hello to the Weed Whacker 2.0. I honestly love this thing. I get really long nose hairs, and I used to just sit at my desk and pluck my nose hairs out with my fingers like a total psychopath, but the Weed Whacker 2.0 has truly allowed me to become sane. See? Doesn't hurt. Head over to manscaped.com and get your hands on the Performance Package 5.0 Ultra today. When you use my code FAVORITESON, you'll get 20% off, free international shipping, and 2 free gifts. That's 20% off, plus free shipping, and 2 free gifts when you use my code FAVORITESON at manscaped.com. Trust me, your nose hairs will thank you. Now back to the video. The next entry in the Metal Gear Solid series was set to be Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain, but because of some issues with development, which we'll get into later, the Phantom Pain was taking a lot longer than they expected. This is where Ground Zeroes comes in. It was meant to be a prologue to the Phantom Pain, a small slice of the full entry that we would get next. Kojima envisioned it as a Hollywood-like intro to the fifth game. If this were a movie, then this was the action-packed beginning section that starts everything off before the real story begins. Ground Zeroes was first revealed at a private 25th anniversary celebration for the Metal Gear series. The game would be running on the Fox engine, the newest piece of technology that the team at Kojima Productions had cooked up. The engine was miles ahead of what they were working with on MGS4, and they were definitely making a big deal out of it. The team was planning on using the engine for all their future projects. Konami published a cryptic site that showcased lighting from the engine. They displayed the engine in use at E3. Kojima was posting about it on Twitter. It was clear at the time that a lot of work went into this piece of tech and that it was shaping up to be something special. Metal Gear Solid 5 Ground Zeroes was released on the Sony PlayStation 3 and 4, the Microsoft Xbox 360 and Xbox One on March 18th, 2014. Now, there's a bunch of other things that were missing in the timeline from when Ground Zeroes was revealed to when it was released, but we'll get to that in a bit. Up until the release of this game, fans were really confused as to what Ground Zeroes actually was. It was only priced at $30, so this clearly wasn't a full AAA experience on its own, but was it half of one? Was it just a demo? Was it just one mission? People weren't really sure. Kojima tried to clear this up in some interviews, but he wasn't doing too many at all at the time, so it seems like those explanations weren't really reaching all of the fans. What Ground Zeroes actually turned out to be was a sort of prologue mission for MGS5, only set in one area called Camp Omega, but featuring tons of replayability in the form of extra missions and secrets. It also mostly functions like Metal Gear Solid 5 itself in terms of the raw gameplay. Of course, we don't have the base building aspect here, so we don't upgrade weapons, we don't develop new tech, but the game itself plays pretty similarly to MGS5. For this reason, I mostly won't go into the intricacies of gameplay for Ground Zeroes. I'll just cover everything once we get to the Phantom Pain. All of the missions in Ground Zeroes are set in one place, called Camp Omega. Not much is known about the place when we first venture in, only that it's some sort of prison camp and that we need to extract both Chico and Paz from the area. The first mission begins with a strange man walking up to Chico's cage that he's been kept in. He claims that Paz told them everything, and they already killed her. He then gives Chico a cassette tape, and Here's to You by Sacco Vanzetti begins playing. This song was also in Metal Gear Solid 4 and was meant to reflect the original ending of that game. Kojima intended for Otacon and Snake to turn themselves in after the finale, where they would be put to death by a firing squad. Here's to You is a song about Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti, two anarchists who were convicted of the murder of two men during an armed robbery. They were eventually sentenced to death, though most of the public thought they were innocent. This was meant to reflect the hero's death that Otacon and Snake would be receiving, but Kojima's team convinced him not to do this.
Give my regards to your boss when you get home.
The last time that we saw Paz, she was in the hidden ending of Peace Walker, proclaiming that she was working for Zero and a secret group that he was heading called Cypher. Chico still remained on the Mother Base team at the end of Peace Walker. Ground Zeroes picks up directly after that game, but as you can see, Paz has now been captured by Cypher, and so has Chico. Supposedly, a Belizean fisherman found Paz somewhere in the ocean, and Chico was captured trying to rescue Paz. Cypher wants to interrogate Paz because they think she might be a double agent, really working for MSF in the end. MSF is particularly concerned with her because she's the group's only connection to Cypher, and they wouldn't want that information getting out into the world. At the same time as this mission, Mother Base, the one that we built in Peace Walker, is undergoing an inspection from the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency. The folks back at Mother Base have their story all wrapped up, and they're hiding the nukes so that no one suspects a thing. Huey is making sure everything goes as planned. The mission couldn't wait because they have no idea if Paz or Chico will be killed, and as we'll see shortly, no one would want these kids in this kind of danger for any longer. We then watch as this new mystery figure erases the XOF logos on his helicopter, rips the patches off his men, and flies out of Camp Omega. Snake is introduced once again, one final time with his signature line.
Kept you waiting, huh?
We're then left to our own devices at this prison camp. Now, the way that we go about this mission is sort of up to us. We definitely have a first objective, which is to find Chico, but we can interrogate guards, we can search for weapons or supplies, we can move around the areas, explore the different environments of the camp. Camp Omega is laid out in basically 5 distinct parts. First, we have the left tent section, which seems to be some sort of soldier's housing. The second is the section that is directly in front of us when we start our mission. Some industrial buildings lie here, a watchtower, and some vehicles. The third section to the right has some more tents, but it also has a rocky outcropping, a sheer cliff which holds the prisoners at Camp Omega. The fourth section is to the north from where we start. It contains a helipad, some buildings and watchtowers, and the outside of the main base. The final section is the main base itself, with a few hallways running underneath it, some buildings inside, and a distinct area downstairs that we'll get to in a moment. Now, the large draw of Camp Omega is just how well designed it is. There are guards placed in nearly every area, but obviously there's some blind spots. There's patrol vehicles that circle the area. Guards will sometimes meet up with each other, split or walk in pairs. There's verticality as well, with guards posted up high with spotlights that will blind us and also make our position incredibly clear to the enemy. There's guards on the ground that will appear out of nowhere, but there are just so many damn ways to approach each situation. For example, let's talk about extracting Chico. Chico's location is to the right of where we start the mission. He's located near the cliff of the facility in a prisoner's camp. When we begin, we're confronted with a soldier in a watchtower in front of us and a gate that we must go through to get to the rest of the base. This is clearly a funnel that we must go through to enter the base proper, but once we exit that funnel, the world is our oyster. We can take a path directly to the right, hugging the fence and taking out enemies along the way, especially the soldier in the watchtower that's ahead of us. We can also take that same path, but cut through the tents in the center for more cover. We can go around all of this by heading to the warehouse-like buildings in the center for even more cover, and then wrapping around the tent area to find another path to the prisoner camps. And obviously, Metal Gear Solid 5 as a whole is more of an open world game than previous entries in the series, but this drastically opens up stealth opportunities for the player. It makes our approach truly our approach. Our distinct way of handling each situation will make our path our own. This truly makes the player feel as if they are in Snake's shoes once again, something that Kojima has been trying to do since the MSX era. The game also puts a heavy focus on preparing to enter the mission. Preparation is absolutely key in Ground Zeroes. Unless we already know where the enemies are, it's not advised to just start waltzing into the base and cruising around. We need to be able to find the enemy positions first. Using our binoculars and marking targets is very important so that we can keep track of enemy routes. We can take out enemies in our way, and just so that we don't get surprised when we're taking on this mission. And while we're at it, let's talk about the Fox engine. It's something that I'll return back to quite a lot during this video, but the thing just looks so damn good. I also can't really fully articulate how good this game feels to play compared to past entries in the series. And that isn't to say that any of the other games play bad, it's just to make the point that Metal Gear Solid 5 has the advantage of technology and experience on its side. Aiming is better than it's ever been, the lighting systems and shaders and textures all look gorgeous, every inch of this environment looks beautiful. This is something that will obviously carry over into the main game as well, but Ground Zeroes is our first introduction to the Fox engine outside of some soccer games. I also love the setting of Ground Zeroes, a rainy night at a prisoner camp in the ocean. It just feels so dark, so dreary and ominous. It truly feels like a prologue because you can sense something is awry, something is waiting in the shadows that's about to strike, and we're not ready for it at all. At some point, we eventually find Chico's cage. He's among a dozen other prisoners who are also locked up with bags over their heads. When we find Chico, he's listening to the tape that the mystery man gave him. He seems like he either doesn't recognize Snake or like he doesn't want to be rescued at all. Snake eventually has to subdue him by choking him out. We then have to bring Chico to the helicopter to get him out of this place. On the way, he gives us the cassette tape that he was listening to. It was no song, it's actually a recording of Paz being tortured. We can use the audio clues in the tape to determine where she's being held in the camp. Now, first of all, I want to point something out about Ground Zeroes. The tone of Ground Zeroes is wildly different to any of the other games in the series. This game and Phantom Pain are a lot more brutal than previous entries, and they're way darker. In my opinion, I feel like this gives the games the room to tell different stories and pursue different themes, but it also creates a wildly different tone for the games. This new world that we're entering is brutal, it's careless, it's unfeeling, and the game uses that to further the themes that it's trying to present to the audience. I also want to point out the fact that I love the idea of forcing the player to listen to a tape to determine the location of an objective. Making us decipher audio clues gives us another level of interactivity with the game. It forces us out of our seat and makes us far less passive than we would be if we just had a marker on the map. It also ties back into the tone of the game by forcing us to listen to this torture tape while trying to be unfeeling ourselves and get information out of this. But it's hard to be unfeeling when we still have such a connection to Paz. Sure, she betrayed MSF at the end of Peace Walker, but she was still just a kid. She was being used by the parties at hand. Zero was using her to try to get at Snake in any way that he could. There's always going to be some level of innocence there, and it's hard to hear a character like that go through pain. A lot of this game feels like it's far more reflective of the modern era of war, and a lot of that modern era is steeped in the idea of the spread of information. A level of connection is achieved these days that could have never been predicted before. This tape, this area, and this story almost feels like some sort of live leak video. It almost doesn't feel real. There's a level of disconnection there that you just sort of have to feel. And this also goes further into what Camp Omega is based on, which is the real-life Camp X-Ray, or as it's more commonly known, Guantanamo Bay. Guantanamo Bay was called a black site, some sort of detention center where prisoners are not offered any sort of charges or trial. They're just held indefinitely, usually tortured with the intent of extracting critical information from them. And Camp Omega is a black site as well, one that looks very similar to Guantanamo Bay when it comes especially to the cages that prisoners are kept in. But Guantanamo was not the only black site. The CIA has made use of black sites all across the world for years. These black sites began to rise to prominence after the September 11th attacks. During the invasion of Afghanistan, the CIA began to set up these sites to hold prisoners who were suspected of being associated with or connected to Al-Qaeda. A site in a closed-down brick factory north of Kabul, a site in Thailand established in 2002, and of course the famous Guantanamo Bay. These sites were home to numerous methods of torture that were brutal, unrelenting, and excessive. And there was a massive campaign to have these places shut down after George W. Bush left office, especially considering the fact that multiple prisoners there were found to have no connections to any terrorist groups whatsoever, but they were still tortured for years. This campaign eventually filtered out after the public lost interest, and Guantanamo Bay is still running to this day with somewhere around 30 prisoners in its roster. Camp Omega feels very similar to these sort of detention sites. It's located in Cuba, it's off-grid, it's a total black site where the heads of this place can do whatever they want to try and get information out of the subjects there. Of course, in this world, these prisoners don't have connections to terrorist groups. One of them is a small child that was trying to rescue his friend, and the other just happened to be working with the wrong person. I guess from some perspective, you could view the rebels that Chico and Amanda were associated with as terrorists, but maybe it's just all about the perspective that you view it from. Once we get Chico out, we have to look for Paz. Through listening to the tape, we determine that she's inside of the main building of the base, past the helipad. The area is pretty heavily guarded with watchtowers, vehicles, and plenty of soldiers looking over the entry points. But using the cover of night, the shadows cast on the concrete, and the various weapons at our disposal, we can make it inside. There we find Paz, who is already unconscious, weary from hours and days of torture. She's barely alive at this moment. It's our goal to transport her out of there and get her to the chopper. And with that, our mission is complete. Both Paz and Chico are safe on board Pequod, MSF's resident exfiltration chopper. Heading back to Mother Base, Chico finds a stitched up wound in Paz's stomach. The medic aboard the chopper and Snake realize pretty quickly that something was done to her. When they open the wound, they realize that XOF soldiers at the base put a bomb inside of her stomach. Luckily, the crew manages to get it out, and Snake tosses it out of the chopper. As the crew arrives back at Mother Base, something is off. They can't make contact with the base. No one is responding. When they reach their destination, they realize why. The entire base is on fire. Struts are collapsing with explosions. Someone has assaulted the place. It seems like that inspection that was supposed to take place was probably a ruse. The chopper briefly touches down, and Miller and some soldiers are launching a final defense on the main platform. Snake manages to save Miller and get him out before the entire base collapses. Once on board, Miller immediately blames Paz and starts going after her. She must have given up some information during her torture to let Cypher know the location of the base. Paz quickly wakes up from her stupor and heads for the door of the chopper. She reveals that there's another bomb planted inside of her, but this one...
It's all right, we got it out.
She jumps out of the helicopter, sacrificing herself to save Snake and his friends one final time, but it's already too late because another chopper has tailed them and launches a missile right for the vehicle. The helicopter explodes in a fiery blaze. Miller, Snake, and the crew are all enveloped in flame. After the credits, we learn that the IAEA was never meant to inspect Mother Base. They have no record of it. MSF had a large list of clients that wouldn't want the world to know they were using unsavory mercenaries to do their dirty work. So when the scandal got out, they all denied involvement. In the final post-credits scene, we hear Zero talking to Paz. He talks about the song that's playing and how the immigrants that were executed would serve as a message to others.
Nicola, Bart, immigrants wrongly executed. But their deaths served as a message to others. That ours is a society that murders the innocent. Do you too believe your sacrifice will change the world?
Cypher has been in hiding since some experiment that Zero has pulled off. Skullface, the mystery man that we saw before, actually works for Cypher, but he's disconnected from the top, from Zero. He only gets his orders by proxy. Paz actually met with Zero in person so that she could get into contact with Big Boss. Skullface wants Zero's location. He's waging some sort of war against his boss. Just like Big Boss, the two are coming to blows, but Skullface wants to take him out. He briefly describes his motives here, that he had no choice in his life, in where he was born, or even the language that he speaks. Of course, this is just the beginning, so those threads are only implanted here as a seed, something that will grow and blossom over the course of the Phantom Pain's runtime. The post-credits scene only ends when Paz finally relents and gives Skullface Zero's location. And that's basically it for Ground Zeroes as a main story that wraps into the Phantom Pain. The Phantom Pain will pick up where Ground Zeroes left off, and this game is incredibly important to understanding that story. It's a huge, massive, pivotal event. It acts as the bridge between Peace Walker and the Phantom Pain. But there's a lot more to Ground Zeroes than meets the eye. Before we get into the rest of the game, I'd just like to talk about the story and how it sets up the final entry in the series, and also how it continues the story from Peace Walker. So when we last left Snake and Miller, and honestly the entirety of MSF, they had just beaten back the betrayal from Paz. Paz revealed herself to be working with a new group called Cypher that Zero was in charge of. She clearly had some sort of anger against Snake and his group, wanting both revenge, but also taking them out because they wouldn't integrate into Cypher. Possibly she disagreed with their entire ideology, their new military company that they had formed, a state without nations, ungovernable. Or possibly Zero was using her to get to Snake. And as we see now, Paz wants revenge on Zero. She wants to get back at him, and she wants to save Snake, so this must be true. But giving Skullface this information turns out to bite her in the end. Paz is made an innocent casualty in this war, though not truly innocent because she did get involved with Zero and MSF and the whole gang in the first place. She still ends up trying to save Snake's life in the end. Chico, we will find, was also killed during the helicopter incident. He was clearly very much an innocent, having almost nothing to do with the conflicts in Peace Walker. Sure, he was involved in rebellions, but he just wanted to help people that he considered his friends. And in his last act, he tried to save Paz on his own, possibly trying to emulate the things that he had seen Big Boss do in the past. Snake is clearly trying to save these two, not only for tactical information, but also out of a place of kindness. He has to feel some level of responsibility, especially for Paz, since she's gotten caught up in this war between him and Zero. And for Chico, because he's an innocent that should have never been involved. And a lot of this only touches on the actual deaths and injury of MGS-5. Mother Base's destruction, which we will come to learn more about in The Phantom Pain, wasn't just a base. It wasn't just some floating hunk of junk in the sea. It was Miller and Snake's home, and it was home to their friends, their comrades, their brothers in arms. There's a deeper sort of kinship that these men feel towards each other. They fought alongside each other. They died with each other. They lived with each other. And they built a paradise, a place where they could use their skills and talents for something that they thought was worth working towards. And now all of that is gone, wiped away in the blink of an eye. Hundreds of soldiers died at Mother Base. Their bodies sank into the sea with the flaming husk of what was once home. Mother Base's destruction is also the death of a symbol, an icon showing that these men could come together and build something outside of governments, outside of nations, and they could thrive. This clearly was a threat to the world. It wasn't only a threat to the power that men in high positions wanted, but it was also a threat to the status quo, to the structures of society that have been built in the modern world. Mother Base threatened all of that, and it makes sense that the world didn't come crying when it was destroyed. Mother Base will leave a void, and Phantom Pain will explore that void, but for now, this tale ends in grief. But like I said before, this isn't the only thing that Ground Zeroes offers. Many were upset when Ground Zeroes was released because they felt that it wasn't worth the money and that there wasn't enough value in paying $20 or $30 for a game with only one mission. And I can definitely understand where people are coming from. But I have to assume that most of these people only played the first mission and never tried any of the others, because Ground Zeroes actually has 4 extra side ops that can be played, all incredibly different from each other and requiring different tools or tactics to complete, and 2 extra missions, one of which was originally only on the PlayStation version of the game. These missions are great, and not only do they have completely different objectives, different approaches, and take place at different times of the day, they also have their own side objectives and reasons to offer replayability. Most of the side ops are pretty simple and light in terms of story, so I'll just run through them all pretty quickly. Eliminate the Renegade threat sees us taking out 2 different soldiers inside of the military base. Their names are Glaz and Politz, or the Eye and the Finger. They're a sniper spotter team and are renowned for the amount of kills that they have on their record. And this doesn't just extend to soldiers they've killed, but also families and children. The most interesting part about this mission is the fact that it showcases how dynamic the systems, even in Ground Zeroes, can be. The targets don't just stand in their predicted place while they wait for us to walk up and kill them. If we take long enough, the targets will move and eventually just leave the base, so we have to be quick with how we pick them off. The Intel Operative Rescue mission sees us going into Camp Omega loud to rescue a very important member of the Intel team. He's an invaluable asset, and we have to make sure to get him back at any cost. Since this mission is so sensitive, we don't have time for stealth. We're just blasting our way inside, taking out armored vehicles and helicopters. When we find the intel operative, it turns out to be Kojima himself.
Snake. What took you so long?
The classified intel acquisition mission sees us sneaking into Camp Omega once again to find an operative who has been secretly working within Camp Omega. He has some information that's supposed to be very important. The way we have to get this agent, though, is really interesting. We can, of course, just find him wandering about, but if we signal him with one of the watchtowers, he'll walk over to check it out, and then we can choke him, which is the signal. He'll then give us the information we requested, but it then turns out that this was the wrong information. It was actually a plant device that sets off the alarms in the facility, and he gave the information to someone else. What's also pretty interesting is that he tries to warn Snake about Skullface before Snake chokes him. This is the main appeal of a lot of these missions. It's just how dynamic they are, and how they can really go a ton of different ways. The last side-op mission sees us taking out anti-air weaponry so that a bombing run can be completed on the base. When we do this, though, the run starts way too early and Snake is almost caught in the blast. Obviously, whoever was bombing the place, probably someone from the West, wanted the camp's existence scrubbed from the record. The other thing that a lot of these missions do as well is expand the world around the base a little bit more. They slowly reveal why the base was here, who was behind it, and build the mystery around the main events in Ground Zeroes just a little bit. The last two missions in the game are extra missions. While the side ops in Ground Zeroes aren't canon, the extra missions definitely aren't canon and are just for fun, but they're probably the best ones in the game. The first mission, Jamais Vu, takes place after a Soviet jet crashed nearby the island that Camp Omega is located on. Apparently something escaped the wreckage and made it to shore, and now most of the soldiers at the camp have been body snatched. Body snatchers. Get it? It's Snatcher. It's Snatcher. Obviously, this mission is a huge love letter to Kojima's adventure game Snatcher, which I already talked about in depth in the Metal Gear Solid 1 video. But the interesting part here is that we're actually playing as Raiden for the entire mission. Raiden has somehow time-traveled from the future and come back here to help Big Boss eliminate this threat. We have to take out all the Snatchers and defend the helipad from choppers and vehicles. The whole mission is just action-packed and a ton of fun. The last mission, and probably my favorite in Ground Zeroes, is called Deja Vu. Deja Vu sees Snake heading to the island to investigate some pictures that were sent to the team. He has to recreate the situations from each of the pictures. These all happen to be moments from Metal Gear Solid 1. We're walking back through the memories of that first game, the helipad at the beginning, the Psycho Mantis introduction, and even the last car chase with Liquid. These flashbacks are all presented and commented on by Miller, who's over comms doing goofy impressions of the different characters from that game and quoting lines.
Impressive work, Snake. Mission complete is not what I'm here to say. Believe it or not, the real mission starts here.
Huh? This is not Master Miller.
I really do enjoy this kind of look back at where the series came from, especially since the series was just about to be finished for good. But there's also something that's even more curious here. One of the subtasks that we can complete in this mission is to run around and find these logos of all the different Metal Gear games. We have to erase these logos using the same type of gun that Skullface used on the chopper before he departed the island. The whole thing is presented as this very somber, very reflective task, with Miller offering some commentary that seems all too apt when looked back in retrospect.
Good. You erased a marking. Looks like there's more of them. You might be able to erase the markings, but the memories will never disappear. Metal Gear Solid. Peace Walker. You did it. You erased all the markings. Every one of them will always be with you.
Now, why would this be in the game in the first place? It was no secret during the lead up to MGS5 that Kojima had stated that he wanted this one to be his final game, and he was serious this time. but I'm not sure if anyone actually believed him this time around. He had said the same thing for MGS 2, 3, and 4, and here he was again making another Metal Gear game. But there might be an explanation to this, as there were tensions bubbling behind the scenes that, at the time of Ground Zero's release, the public wasn't really aware of yet. We'll get back to that in a bit. But overall, Ground Zeroes is just a fantastic game, especially when you view it totally divorced from the Phantom Pain. It's still so good, even to this day. Each mission feels entirely unique from the last, some requiring you to go in loud, some requiring you to maintain stealth, and some requiring the use of different weapons or tools like C4. The game presents this great slice of the systems that would be in the Phantom Pain, but each mission also feels dynamic from itself. The explanation of approach that I presented with the main mission in the game is also present with just about every mission in Ground Zeroes. We're not tied down or forced into one path with any of these missions. We can head off and complete side objectives, we can try to interrogate soldiers to find out information before heading to our objective, we can scout the area and mark out targets. It's just so replayable, and while you can easily sink hundreds of hours into the Phantom Pain, Ground Zeroes also has its own replayability. I don't think Ground Zeroes was bad at all, and I also don't think it wasn't worth the money at the time. Clearly, trouble was already brewing though, because Konami were the ones that forced Ground Zeroes to be released in the first place. It was never meant to be split into the prologue and the rest of the game, but Konami was frustrated with how long the development of this game was taking. And those frustrations would only grow over the next year until Phantom Pain's release. But before we can get to that, there's a strange bit of meat in this Metal Gear sandwich that needs to be talked about first. During the lead up to Ground Zeroes and the Phantom Pain, Kojima had been making quite a few comments about making a Silent Hill game. He first tweeted in August of 2012 that it would be scary if Silent Hill was made with the Fox engine. This led to a ton of speculation and fans clamoring to imagine what a Silent Hill game made by Hideo Kojima would look like. And this was probably the peak of Silent Hill fans taking issue with Konami and the direction that the series had been moving in. This was August of 2012. Silent Hill Downpour had been released earlier that year, and the infamous HD collection had come out soon after. Book of Memories was just on the way, so Silent Hill fans had been in this predicament with the series for years, seeing it follow this downward trend and Konami making all of the wrong moves at every opportunity. But the Metal Gear series wasn't exactly in the same spot. Even if fans were upset with decisions made in specific entries, the games were still consistently good. They were praised critically, they sold really well, and time was kind to them overall. So maybe Kojima could sprinkle some of that magic on the series and return it to its former glory. It was certainly an interesting thought, and Kojima only fueled these flames when, a few months later, he did an interview with Eurogamer where he stated that the president of Konami called him up and asked him to make a Silent Hill game. This was furthered in March 2014 when Kojima stated that the game he would most like to reboot or direct himself was Silent Hill. This was the 2-year-long tease that would ultimately end at Gamescom 2014. There, a reveal for a new mystery horror game was made, developed by 7780S Studios. It was for a game called PT, a game that was available for free on the PlayStation Store immediately. At the time, I had no idea what this was, but it looked cool, and I immediately downloaded it and played it. No one had heard of this studio before, but the internet pretty quickly figured out that Kojima had to have been behind this. And PT was fantastic. The game is a very short horror demo that sees us walking through the infinite hallways of an ever-changing house. We go through this loop over and over again, some things slightly changing each time we complete it. And the game, when you boil it down, is very simple, but it manages to use horror, atmosphere, and design to create something truly special. It's terrifying just to walk through these corridors. It feels like we're walking through a picture book of someone's memories, and these memories, which aren't truly memories, slowly begin to unfold as the story progresses and we find out what really happened. The game also manages to capture the unsettling feeling of finding something just a little bit off. In the early stages, when we see something shifted, moved, or a door slightly ajar, we feel as if we're seeing this in our home, as if something has moved, but we weren't the ones to move it. It's incredibly unsettling, and PT does have its fair share of jump scares, but it manages to maintain most of its horror through the use of sound, environment design, and just pure atmosphere. I always enjoy horror that is more based in a mood rather than big scares, because it's easy to catch someone off guard, but it's very hard to unsettle someone to their core. And PT does all of this so well that it managed to carve out its own space in horror history. It's honestly one of my favorite horror experiences, and it's really just a demo for a larger game. It was so game-changing for the scene that many games would go on to take its formula and repeat it for years. Hell, even Bloober Team themselves owe a lot to PT, as Layers of Fear was mostly taking this idea and expanding upon it. Now, of course, this does tie back into our story, because once you reach the end of PT, you would realize that it was actually a playable teaser, hence the P and the T. It was a demo for a game called Silent Hills, being directed by Hideo Kojima and involving Norman Reedus and Guillermo del Toro. This game would very quickly catch the world on fire. People were excited for Silent Hill again. They weren't terrified of what Konami was going to do to the franchise next. They were interested. With a fresh face in the franchise, someone that could take the game and come at it with a completely new perspective, plus tons of experience in heading his own franchise, it was bound to be something great. But this is where all the trouble began, because on April 25th, 2015, PT was removed from the PlayStation Store, and a couple days later, the game would be canceled, and things would only go downhill from there. So what exactly does this have to do with Metal Gear Solid 5? Well, to get to that, we should probably just start talking about the game itself. As we've already stated, the development of Metal Gear Solid 5 was a rocky one. Looking at articles published at the time, it was very clear that Konami was not happy with how long the game was taking to make. And judging by the fact that they wanted to release Ground Zeroes before the full game was done, they clearly wanted to see some results from the sizable investment that they had put into the franchise. But let's go back a bit, shall we? Metal Gear Solid 5 was actually revealed in 2012. In February of that year, fans started speculating that something must be moving with the series because a website called Development Without Borders had been made. Fans were quick to speculate that this must be connected to the Metal Gear series. Shortly after this, Ground Zeroes was revealed at a private 25th anniversary event for the Metal Gear series. And then, in December of that same year, a strange game was revealed at the Spike Video Game Awards. It was called The Phantom Pain, and it was developed by someone called Moby Dick Studios. The footage shown off claimed to be 100% gameplay, and to be honest, it looked great, but no one was really sure what it was, at least not at the start. Pretty quickly after this reveal, fans began to speculate that this was actually the new Metal Gear game. The domain for the website of Moby Dick Studios was fairly new. The supposed director of the game, Joachim Mogren, had a first name that was an anagram for Kojima, and it just so happened that the words Metal Gear Solid 5 fit perfectly into the negative spaces of the Phantom Pain. Despite all of this, Kojima himself said that he was not involved in the game, and Mogren did an interview with Jeff Keighley. In this interview, he showed off some screenshots of the Phantom Pain, but Keighley was quick to point out that the Fox Engine logo was present in all of the screenshots. This interview promptly ends after this, and obviously this made things even more suspicious. If you haven't guessed it yet, this was all a big ruse planned by Kojima and Keighley. The game was revealed to be the next entry in the Metal Gear Solid series at GDC 2013. Supposedly, Kojima wanted to reveal the game this way to try and get people's unadulterated opinions on the new Fox engine. He didn't want the audience to give him special leeway because he was Kojima. Then, of course, the year after, Ground Zeroes was released to the public, and so was PT. And 2014 was looking to be a great year for fans of Kojima games. A new, full Metal Gear Solid entry was on the way, Ground Zeroes was really well polished and just a fantastic stealth sandbox, and Kojima was starting work on a new game that was shaping up to be just as good, Silent Hills. So what could go wrong? Well, the answer to that question is just about everything. It all began in 2015, the next year. It started in March when people noticed something was off because the Kojima Productions logo was being removed from a lot of the Konami branding, especially the box art for the Phantom Pain. Of course, the internet was outraged and people started to wonder what the hell was going on. Konami quickly quelled the fires by saying that they were just rebranding Kojima Productions into Konami Digital Entertainment. This was quickly met with some resistance, though, as reports started to come out that Kojima was leaving Konami after Metal Gear Solid 5, and that he and all of his staff at Kojima Productions were just contractors for the final game in the series. This was obviously a shock, because at this point, why would Kojima want to leave Konami? It was understandable why he would want to leave the Metal Gear franchise, because he had been done with it for over a decade at this point. He clearly wanted to move on to something different, but that didn't have to happen outside of Konami. And if Konami was making him leave, then why would they want to get rid of their star developer? Kojima was kind of an oddity for this period of gaming. Most of the big names in video games either weren't making games anymore, or they had fallen into making really poor projects by this time. The age of video game rock stars was surely dead at this point, and Kojima really was one of the last ones left. And you really didn't even have to be a rock star to be notable, just a name that most people knew. So why would Konami want to get rid of that recognition, that trust that had been built up over the years? Things would only get worse when, in March, they began to post job openings for a brand new Metal Gear series, and shortly after, canceling a Kojima Station broadcast that was scheduled to release. Things were heating up quickly, and it seemed like either Kojima was getting fired, or he was tired of working at this company and wanted to leave. Konami once again attempted to release statements to quell the flames, because at this point, fans were running with any new piece of information to fuel their theories. Every time they did this, though, something even worse followed. It's like someone ensuring you that they aren't stealing your wallet as they have your wallet in their hand and start stabbing you in the stomach a couple seconds later. PT was entirely removed from the PlayStation Store. The game was canceled and Konami removed itself from the New York Stock Exchange. The last real development to happen in this whole saga was a Konami explanation. They stated that they were pursuing a mobile-first strategy moving forward, and that they wouldn't comment on the future of either Metal Gear or Silent Hill. This whole saga of reports and speculation sort of ended a few months before the release of Metal Gear Solid 5, and there wasn't much press done on the game itself. This was probably because much of the media cycle had to do with the fates of the creator and the company publishing it, rather than the game itself. But before the release of the game, people weren't exactly sure how to take this whole situation. I think most fell into the camp that Konami had to be doing something terrible to Kojima, and I have slightly mixed feelings about this. I think it was probably some combination of both, with Kojima bearing slightly less of the responsibility for the situation. But imagine things from Konami's perspective for a moment. You have a creator who is probably getting paid quite a lot and who is quite demanding creatively. His new game is taking far too long and has seen no returns because it hasn't released yet. Meanwhile, you have other parts of the company that are churning out mobile games for a fraction of the cost, only for them to bring in millions of dollars. At this point, Konami probably just wasn't seeing dollar signs with Kojima anymore, and he was probably starting to become more adamant about not making another game in the Metal Gear series and moving on to something new. This differing of paths is probably what led to the disagreement in the first place, and I think that most people like to imagine that there was some big secret blow-up behind the scenes, that Kojima and the executives at Konami were screaming at each other in some boardroom, but it probably didn't look like that. Kojima probably determined that he wanted to leave because the company was too restrictive, and they slighted him because of this. Because he wasn't going to be a part of the organization anymore, they would be removing his name from branding and canceling his future games. Now, this doesn't really focus on the fact that Kojima and his staff were restricted from making outside calls and using company internet while they were at work. Clearly, Konami didn't like the fact that he was leaving, and in my opinion, a lot of these emotions and feelings went into making Metal Gear Solid 5. Now, I will say, I don't think this is the central theme, but I do think it probably influenced a good part of the game, and I also think it probably makes PT make a lot more sense in retrospect. We'll explore this idea a bit more in depth as we get further into the video, but for now, we should probably talk about the game. Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain was released for the Sony PlayStation 3 and 4, the Microsoft Xbox 360 and Xbox One, and for Windows on September 1st, 2015. The Phantom Pain opens with a quote, "It is no nation we inhabit, but a language. Make no mistake, our native tongue is our true fatherland." Emil Cioran, Romanian philosopher. We then see a brief shot of a sink and a mirror as sounds of gunfire can be heard off in the distance. Just another day in a war without end, Outer Heaven. We see a tape that has a title written on it, From the Man Who Sold the World. We are then treated to a first-person intro sequence while a cover of The Man Who Sold the World plays in the background, performed by Midge Ure. Snake is lying in a hospital bed as we see through his eyes, and a nurse is shocked when he finally wakes up. This is the beginning of the prologue, Awakening. 3 days later, we're looking through Snake's eyes once again. A doctor speaks to us as we get a short movement tutorial. We're allowed to choose a new name, a new identity. Snake has been in a coma for 9 years, and this information causes him to go into shock, forcing the staff to sedate him again. 4 days later, Snake is awakened once again as the doctor explains his situation. The explosion in the helicopter caused his body to be filled with shrapnel, 108 pieces of foreign material to be specific. Most of this was removed, but there are still remnants that they couldn't remove. If they took them out from his head, his brain will hemorrhage. The doctors deliver a final piece of news that causes Snake to go into shock, that in the blast, his left arm was lost. He wakes up again 1 week later. The doctor tells Snake that people want him dead. There are a lot of people out there that wish he never woke up, that he didn't survive the attack. People will be coming for him, and because of this, they need to alter his appearance. Because of this, we're allowed to choose a new appearance. The doctor shows us some pictures of our comrades, Miller, Snake, a pilot, and a Mother Base soldier. He tells Snake that his name is now Ahab, and that he must forget everything from his life before.
Forget everything. Your name, your past.
He shows us Snake's face before the operation, but before the operation can even go underway, the doctor is attacked and killed by an intruder. The woman that killed the doctor calls into a radio. She's here to kill Snake, and she's going to have to kill the patient in the next bed over as well. He's seen too much. But that patient won't be going down so easily. He wakes up and saves Snake by lighting the assassin on fire as she falls out of a window. The man introduces himself as Ishmael. He's been watching over Snake and protecting him for the last 9 years.
Who are you? Who am I? You're talking to yourself. Been watching over you for 9 years.
He then injects Snake with something to get his body working again. He's been bedridden in a coma for 9 years, so his limbs won't function like he wants them to. This leads to Snake flopping on the ground like a fish while we follow Ishmael throughout the hospital, attempting to keep up with him. Kojima stated in interviews that this was supposed to mimic the evolution of man, or humans taking their first steps. I think it does something else as well, though. Throughout this pretty decently long prologue, we will barely have full control of Snake. Of course, we'll be moving forward. At certain points, we'll have to hide from some guards, but very rarely will we actually be able to defend ourselves. It makes us feel incredibly powerless, unlike almost any section in the series has. Maybe it's rivaled by the torture sequences where we're literally unable to even move, but crawling through this hospital and being unable to approach situations like we normally do is pretty startling. It adds a level of intensity and realism to this sequence as well. Ishmael and Snake begin heading for the elevator, and as they do, they see something very strange. They see a floating boy coupled with a huge man who appears to be on fire. The two are blown back by a massive blast, and they're only barely saved by the sprinkler system in the facility. The two are forced to head through a different direction to try and escape the hospital. Ishmael needs to reset Snake's arm because it's popped out. Soldiers flood the hallways, and we have to head into a side room. We then get a pretty brutal sequence where patients in this hospital are killed around Snake as he's forced to keep quiet under the bed. This whole sequence really furthers the brutal tone that Ground Zeroes sets up. And there's something to be said about this because none of the other games have really had this level of brutality. The fourth entry in the series flirted with the idea a little bit, but as you already know, there was a ton of release from this tension, from the tone. Metal Gear Solid 5 gives this relief through gameplay, by the long periods of time where you aren't looking at cutscenes and living in its world. But for the beginning prologue, we'll barely get relief from this brutal, cold world. We end up seeing 2 people killed by a chopper, cut down by the guns of the vehicle. Snake once again barely escapes into a hallway of people who are also cut down by gunfire. We aren't exactly sure who these people are that are looking for Snake, but it's clear that they will stop at nothing to kill him, even if it means taking the lives of many innocents. Snake and Ishmael escape into a side room and have to hide as each small room is searched. They make it into the hallway and play dead among the bodies. They're almost found, but the man on fire shows up. He makes a beeline for Snake, but is distracted by a chopper that starts shooting at him. The missiles and bullets have no effect on him, but it's made clear that this man isn't working for the same side as these troops. Is it possible this is some sort of strange convergence of multiple groups that want Snake dead? Ishmael manages to shoot out a water pipe and put the flames out once again. Snake finally gets a hold of a pistol and helps Ishmael take out some soldiers. Once the two reach the lobby and the exit is finally in sight, Ishmael provides a distraction by diving off the stairs and shooting at some enemies. Snake makes his own way down and tries to get out the front door, but the floating boy and the man on fire arrive once again and start to cause chaos. The soldiers in the lobby are taken out by a tank that crashes through the front door. More soldiers are cut down by a crashing helicopter and its blades. Snake is eventually blasted out of the front door and only escapes with his life because Ishmael crushes the being that resembles a man with an ambulance. Snake gets in and the two make their escape, still being fired at by the man behind them. Flaming debris is tossed their way and it causes them to crash. When Snake wakes up, Ishmael is gone. The floating boy uses some sort of massive, giant flaming whale to crash a helicopter behind him, and the man on fire is riding a flaming Pegasus. Snake gets saved again by a mystery man on a white horse. He helps us escape the forest while we shoot at the man on fire on horseback. The floating boy and the man on fire are still around after the two get out, but they decide to pull back. The mystery man finally introduces himself as someone that we've already met before, Revolver Ocelot himself. Ocelot says that he was sent here to rescue Snake. The whole world wants him dead, but 9 years gone, it's time to rebuild the nation that was lost to Cypher. Miller was recently captured by the Soviets in Afghanistan. He was on an operation to distract people from Snake's location. Now it's our job to save him. This begins the first chapter of our story, Chapter 1, Revenge. But before we get to that, let's talk about the absolute firestorm of information and action that was the prologue. So the prologue is effectively another setup for the story that the Phantom Pain is about to tell. It's reintroducing us to the world after 9 years. While Ground Zeroes was more of a factual prologue to the story, reintroducing characters and the actual events that happen, Phantom Pain's prologue is one that's more based on feeling. Obviously, we have real things here, things that we'll get answers on in due time and explanations for those things. But a lot of this is about the feeling of the game, the tone that this game is going to have, and setting up the themes for the story. Like I said before, the prologue is effectively us learning how to walk again, and about the horror of feeling defenseless as one of the most skilled and powerful men in the entire world. What does it look like when Big Boss has had everything stripped away from him? What does it look like when the legend has been reduced to a comatose body lying in a bed? It presents us the legend in a state that we've never seen him before. And Snake has lost everything at this point. Not only has he lost his arm, not only has he lost 9 years, but he's also lost Mother Base. As we talked about before, Mother Base is now gone. Not just the physical base and the parts of the world that the team had manipulated to their will, but also the bonds that had been created with his team. Those things that are more ethereal, less tangible, but even more important than a location or a building. He's definitely at his lowest, and he's effectively being propped up by Ishmael. Ishmael is a strange figure because he's sort of functioning as Snake for this section of the game. He's doing all of these heroic things and helping us out while we can barely walk. The only other time where we had this experience was in MGS2, when Snake was the literal legend and hero, and where Raiden was a bit more naive and a bit less experienced. The biggest thing that the prologue does is introduce a ton of questions to answer throughout the game. It's really good at just throwing a ton of stuff at us all at once, so that the rest of the game can slowly elaborate and build on those mysteries throughout the course of the story. Who is the man on fire? Who is the floating boy? Who wants Snake dead? Why do they want him dead? What brought Ocelot back to help Snake? Why is there a giant fucking whale floating in the sky? A lot of these will not be answered for quite a while, but they're meant to be introduced here as a way to keep them in our mind and let them rest there until they click. And there are some things that are just left as mysteries because we aren't supposed to know them yet. The prologue is also just a really damn good linear action sequence. It has a ton of movement, of course a lot of cutscenes and not a ton of interactivity, but that's to be expected from the series at this point. And trust me, the rest of the game is going to give us plenty of time to take control. But the action here is just insane. The tank blasting through the door, the soldiers being chopped up by the helicopter blades, the man on fire blasting a rocket back at the chopper, even just the intensity of the soldiers walking up to Snake and Ishmael as they lie on the ground. It's all just done so well, and it really feels like the full culmination of what Kojima wanted to do in making games more cinematic. This extends to a lot of the cutscenes in Metal Gear Solid 5, but it does feel like we're coming full circle. That also feels like the overall theme of the game, and while there are others that are far stronger, the theme of coming full circle certainly feels like the personal theme that permeates the background of the game. This feels like the final chapter of Metal Gear, the thing that Kojima always envisioned making all those years ago. We'll come back to this prologue towards the end of the game because there's a lot here that we just don't have the information for yet. But for now, let's move on to the first chapter. Snake and Ocelot are riding through a desert storm. They come out on the other side in the clear of Afghanistan. Kaz was recently captured and is being held in Dagwandi Kar, a small village nearby. They aren't sure of his specific location, so our first mission is to gather intel. The Soviets invaded Afghanistan 4 years ago, and the West happens to be supporting the Afghani people, the rebels that are holding up against the invasion. Miller was training the Mujahideen rebels when he was captured. This operation was mainly meant to distract specific parties from staying outside of the hospital Snake was being held at. Our job is to go in and get him, and to bring him home safe. Snake now has 2 new tools at his disposal, a bionic arm that has replaced his old one, and an iDroid. Both of these will be incredibly useful tools in the many missions to come. But before we get deep into the gameplay, let's talk about this first mission.
Those 9 years behind you, and return as Big Boss. That's how Kaz would want it. I'll be sending additional intel by radio. Stay sharp. Not one of Miller's bodyguards survived. But they were good. All we found on the scene were their corpses and knees. You'll be missing them. And you're his only hope of getting them back. Now go! Let the legend come back to life.
We search around the nearby camps and eventually find out where Miller is being held. Once we get to him, he's chained to a wall and looks like he's been tortured.
What took you so long?
Everyone Miller was with on that mission died. They were attacked by some strange unit in the mist. When we try to bring Kaz to the chopper, it can't land because the mist in the area is so heavy. We're then introduced for the first time to the Skull unit. We don't know much about these enemies yet, but they certainly don't seem fully human. They have unnatural speed and strength, and they emit a strange aura about them. We can't even take these foes out one-on-one, so we have to run away from them. Eventually we get Kaz out and head back to our new base. Kaz wants to rebuild what they had 9 years ago. He wants to get revenge. He wants to get back at Cypher for taking everything away from them.
Yeah, we were dogs, all right. Slinking around out of Cypher's sight. Digging up whatever kind of dirty money we could find. You name it. We did it. You see this? Diamond Dogs. Our new home. The phantom of our former selves. Triumph. Death. We weren't allowed either. Yeah. I remember it all.
This will be the goal for Metal Gear Solid 5, rebuilding what we had in Peace Walker, and much of its systems will transfer over, but these are no longer the freedom-fighting jovial men that we saw 9 years ago. These men have experienced true loss, pain, and grief. Many of them have not quite figured out how to handle this pain. Miller especially is filled with a burning fire, a fury to see the blood of his enemies on the battlefield. Snake is filled with a similar fury, but one that turns to grief rather than rage. The comparison of these two and how they manage to handle the pain and the memories is one of the biggest parts of the game.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer? Every night, I can feel my leg, and my arm, even my fingers. The body I've lost, the comrades I've lost, won't stop hurting. It's like they're all still there. You feel it too, don't you? I'm the one who got caught up with Cypher.
A group above nations.
Kaz has now vowed to take revenge on Cypher, and in the 9 years since Snake has been out, they've grown larger and larger. We arrive back at Mother Base, and Kaz coins a new name for their new organization.
The world calls for wet work, and we answer. No greater good. No just cause.
Kaz. Cypher sent us to hell. But we're going even deeper.
I know. I'm already a demon. Heaven's not my kind of place anyway.
Dogs of war for 9 whole years. That ends today. Now you're not sleeping, and we're not junkyard hounds. We're diamond dogs.
They'll be called Diamond Dogs from now on, since MSF is truly dead. Kaz's characterization in this game is something I'll come back to time and time again, but I really do feel the need to point out the fact that his anger and rage are just so well portrayed here. It's so aggressive that it's almost a caricature. It's the personification of the feeling when you want to go back, when you want to retrieve something from the past that's now gone, when it feels like your only course of action is to rend and tear rather than to turn away. And Snake agrees that he too wants to rebuild and wants to get revenge, but he has different reasons for this. He wants to move on into the future, to build something better for the next generation, rather than to get one up on the past. After this, Ocelot gives us the Fulton recovery device and a bit of a tutorial. Now that we've actually gained our new mother base, let's go over the gameplay of Metal Gear Solid 5. While the game does have a fantastic story with a ton of interesting themes that I rarely ever see explored in video games, and themes that are explored but not quite in this way, it also has some of the best gameplay the series has ever seen. Metal Gear Solid 5 is a stealth game at its core, and I think at this point I've probably said that about every game in the series because, well, it's true. We can still do all the things that we did in previous Metal Gear games. We can sneak around encampments, we can take out enemies with CQC, we can choke them out, we can neutralize them with tranquilizers, or we can just straight up kill them. Now, obviously, there's a ton of new introductions in terms of gameplay that make Metal Gear Solid 5 drastically different from previous games. A large part of that is how dynamic each area of the world is. Metal Gear Solid 5 is actually sort of an open world style game. We have 2 large areas that we can traverse in the game. The beginning one is in Afghanistan, and the second one, which we unlock later, is in Africa. These areas are mostly open for us to traverse how we would like to. Each main mission in the game will usually be confined to a specific area. Infiltrate this base and extract the prisoner. Infiltrate this base and extract the cargo, etc. At the end of the main mission, we'll be forced to extract and head back to our ACC, which is our Aerial Control Center. During side ops, we're usually dropped into the world, sent to complete a mission, but the difference here is that we don't have to extract after this. We can actually wander around the entire world if we want to either complete other side ops, infiltrate encampments to collect soldiers, resources, etc. But the world itself is very dynamic, just like Ground Zeroes. Depending on the time of day or the weather, soldiers will be placed in different areas. Obviously, at night, it might be a little easier to infiltrate a base because it's harder for soldiers to see us, and soldiers will have different patrols than they did during the day. Bases will also change depending on how we infiltrate them. If we use a sniper rifle quite often, for example, we might show up back to the same base later and all the soldiers will be wearing helmets. The point here is that unlike the previous entries in the series, Metal Gear Solid 5 has a world that actually reacts to you. And it can be kind of hard to think about MGS5 as an open world game. This is mostly because it feels so drastically different from open world games today, or even at the time it was released. I'm no stranger to hating on the open world formula. I think a lot of this genre has just devolved into checklist games. Games where waypoints on the map guide us, we mindlessly travel to these waypoints, press a few buttons, and complete an item on this checklist. Once the checklist is full, we get some big reward and do it all over again. A lot of these games feel nearly identical, just with different skins on, but Metal Gear Solid 5 really feels like it takes the open world idea all the way. Not only does the world feel like it reacts to you, like you have an effect on it, making it a character in its own right, it also feels like it doesn't really hold your hand. The game rarely ever has these waypoints around it, forcing us to go from point to point. It often will require us to reveal those waypoints in different ways, or not interact with the waypoints at all. We can often interrogate soldiers in bases for information, either by holding them up with our gun or by grabbing them. They can tell us where special items are, like blueprints for development, or they can even tell us where a specific objective is that we need to complete for a mission. We can do this if we'd like, but it's never necessary. We can also just wander around and find the prisoner ourselves. This is where the world and base design comes into play, because often, if you think about it hard enough and do some exploring, you can figure out where the prisoner or objective is being held just by looking at the buildings around you. These two options allow the player to play the game the way that they want to. This is kind of what Metal Gear Solid 5 is about in its entirety, player choice and agency. And while most games choose to further this idea by giving your character choices to make in the story, MGS5 allows you to make these choices in its world instead. You also have the option of not interacting with MGS5 as an open world game at all. At any time, you're allowed to call your helicopter down and have it pick you up so you can head back to the ACC. If you want, you can have every side op and main mission function as its own separate level, dropping in to complete the mission and then heading back to the ACC to start another one. I would suspect this is how most people play the game, rarely ever wandering the world on their own. This resembles something much closer to Peace Walker, but again, the game is giving you the choice and telling you to play the game how you want to. The open structure of the world also extends to the missions as well. Each mission, just like Ground Zeroes, has a ton of ways to go about it. Every encampment can be approached from different sides, different points of entry mean different soldiers to take out, different hazards to look out for. This makes the game almost infinitely replayable, because even though some side ops will see you heading back to the same bases that you've already infiltrated, it could be a different time of day. You could be coming into the base from a different angle. It could be later in the story, so these soldiers may have adapted to your style of play, forcing you to use different weapons and items to deal with them. And the key here with MGS5 is just that it provides the player a ton of freedom. Freedom to play the missions the way that they want to interact with the world in the way that they want to. This, in my opinion, is what open world games should be about. They should not be about the illusion of freedom and then giving your player the choice between side mission or story mission. MGS5 takes the open world concept and gives it a true freedom that most games don't even attempt to implement. Now, the world is really only one half or even third or quarter of MGS5. There are so many systems here that are actually tied into the Mother Base systems. So, like I said before, MGS5 is about rebuilding Mother Base. This time it will be under the Diamond Dogs name rather than MSF, but Snake, Miller, and Ocelot are determined to continue the legacy of Big Boss, to further the will of the boss, to recreate the home that they once had 9 years ago, the home that was taken from them. When we begin the game, the new Mother Base only has a command platform, a simple central platform that serves as the brain of the base. There are 7 other units or teams that will be created and added over the course of the game. The first unit, the combat unit, are our men on the front lines. They can be dispatched and deployed through the combat deployment menu. This functions similarly to how it did in Peace Walker. We can send out units of soldiers to take encampments or resources. These will net us GMP, which is our main resource in the game, basically money, or various resources that we need for development or even soldiers. The R&D team is one of the most important teams. They are the ones heading new research into weapons and equipment. The more and higher quality people that we have in this unit will allow us to better develop weapons and equipment to use out in the field. I should note, though, that just about every unit ties back into development in some way. For example, certain weapons and items that we can develop will have a level requirement for the R&D team, but they also might have a level requirement for the combat team or the medical team. So to develop the best equipment, we need to ensure that all of our teams are high level, not just R&D. The base development unit is responsible for expanding Mother Base and outfitting it with new platforms. Having this team at a higher level will actually process materials faster. Our base will automatically collect materials from around its area, but these raw materials must be processed into something usable. These materials can then be used to add new platforms to each of our bases or units. The support unit are the ones ensuring that we get supply drops or strikes in the field. During a mission, we can call down a support strike to either attack the enemy or to resupply us with ammunition, change out a weapon that we're currently using, etc. Having this unit leveled up increases the speed at which they are able to do this. The intel unit is one of the more important ones in the game. They constantly give us information in the field. They can mark enemies on our map, mark approaching threats in the area, and even give us a predicted spot where our objective is going to be. The higher their level, the more accurately and more often they'll be able to do this. The medical team is responsible for recovering soldiers that have been injured in battle or that have become sick on base. The higher their level, the faster these soldiers will be able to recover and get back to work. The final team, the security team, isn't unlocked until much later in the game. They are responsible for defending our base from intruders. This is actually a feature of the online systems and is something that I'll talk about later in the game. So how do we actually get better soldiers for these units and ensure that they're upgraded and staffed? Well, the first way is by extracting soldiers while we're out on missions. Just like in Peace Walker, any soldiers that we tranquilize, stun, or knock out can be extracted and sent back to Mother Base. Because of Big Boss's legendary status in the mercenary world, these soldiers will eventually be turned to our side and convinced to work with Diamond Dogs. A good part of any infiltration is scanning the area. Before we infiltrate an encampment, we can use our binoculars to scope out the area and mark enemies. This is incredibly useful because there's a wild difference between going into a camp blind and knowing where at least a few soldiers are. Once the targets are marked, they can be briefly seen through walls. We can still track their location, so planning a route through a facility becomes much easier. While marking these enemies, though, we can scan them to see what their skills are. We can see what their preferred unit is, like combat or R&D. We can also see if they have any special skills that might help out Mother Base in some way. Extracting these soldiers and sending them back to Mother Base will increase the level of the team that they're assigned to. Eventually, though, we'll reach a cap on how many soldiers we can have in any given team. We can then choose to expand each of the units to allow for more members. This means adding another platform specifically for that unit so that they can facilitate more soldiers. This requires a lot of resources. There are 5 different types of resources in the game: fuel resources, biological material, common metal, minor metal, and precious metals. These resources are very valuable because we'll need a ton to build all of the platforms that Mother Base can accommodate. We can acquire them automatically from Mother Base's base development unit, but we can also get them out in the field. We can find small containers that are placed on tables and bases or just around the world, but we can also find large cargo containers that can be extracted and sent back to base. These platforms are not only important for leveling up the capabilities of our base, but also because we can actually visit Mother Base in this entry. This feature technically wasn't really included in Peace Walker. Sure, you could go to the training missions in the shooting range, and even the last final mission of the game took place there, but you couldn't wander around the facility at your whim. In MGS5, anytime we want, we can head back to Mother Base and look at what we built. As we upgrade platforms, they'll add new buildings, new sections, and the whole thing will begin to grow around us. This adds a whole nother level to the experience of building your base. You're allowed to see the humble beginnings of this new venture, and then eventually see how it blossoms and shines after the work that you've put in. Upgrading our base is also essential for development of weapons and items. We start the game off with a few standard weapons, a silenced pistol, tranq pistol, etc. But through the development system, we can gain access to an absolute horde of weapons, upgrades, and equipment. Each weapon type has its own upgrade tree. I call it a tree, but it isn't really a tree because the places where it splits off don't require us to make a decision. We can gain both of these weapons in the end, it's just about which one we develop first. For example, through the handgun tree, we can develop the Wu pistol, which comes with a suppressor and silencer. We can upgrade this pistol over time, which is absolutely necessary to effective infiltration. This will increase its range and damage, and we can eventually get it to the point where we can upgrade it to have an infinite suppressor. We can develop a variant of this that has a higher penetration so that it will go through armor. We can develop a version that has a huge amount of damage so that we don't have to always get headshots, and we can eventually get an infinite suppressor carbine version with a scope and an underbarrel conversion. There are a ton of other trees within this handgun upgrade system as well. The Wu can be converted into a 9mm version with its infinite suppressor. We can unlock the AM D11-4, which has its own tree and upgrades associated with it. The Burkov is the same, the Geist is the same, the Wu S33-3 is the same, the Uragan 5, the Zorn KP. We can even get a water pistol eventually through the story. There are just a ton of upgrades and different things for us to develop, and don't fool yourself into thinking that throughout the story you'll naturally get all of these weapons. It will require hours and hours of resource retrieval, upgrading your base, and just flat out playing the game to be able to unlock everything. And I should also note that most of the other weapons have this level of variety as well. There's a tree for SMGs, assault rifles, shotguns, grenade launchers, sniper rifles, machine guns, and launchers. The items also have their places here as well. We can develop decoys that help confuse enemies or distract them during battle. We can develop flare grenades that call in support helicopters, upgrade our hand grenades, smoke grenades, stun grenades, sleep grenades, C4, mines, etc., etc. Now, for most of the main story in the game, I kept my loadout pretty much the same. I would often go in with a silenced tranq pistol, a silenced tranq sniper, a silenced assault rifle just in case things got hairy, and my bionic arm. I then equipped a host of C4, mines, cardboard boxes, decoys, etc., just so I could be prepared for other situations. This was my loadout for most of the missions that I completed. Now, of course, certain missions will require that you have C4 or a launcher to complete them effectively, but outside of that, I was generally trying to keep stealth as best I could. I also preferred the tranquilizer weapons because I wanted to extract as many soldiers as I could, and it goes without saying that you can't extract a dead soldier. But some of the most fun that I had in the game was once I was done with the main story. I was just cleaning up the side ops and completely shaking up my loadout, trying new weapons that I had developed or never used, trying new items that just seemed wacky and interesting. Things can get so wild in this game if you really let them, and trying out all of this stuff was just so much fun. Upgrading your binoculars to let you scan higher ranked soldiers, your Fulton device to let you extract bigger equipment like vehicles, and your eye droid to let you mark more targets are all pretty much essential though, and some of them are even required for later side ops. But the development system furthers the idea of freedom once again. There is no one true path here in the beginning. You're allowed to choose which weapons you want to specialize, which ones you want to take with you on missions, and effectively how you want to play the game. A large part of Metal Gear Solid 5's gameplay that I haven't talked about yet is the buddy system. There are 4 total buddies that we can use in the game. The buddies will join you on your missions and help you out in some way, shape, or form. The first one that we get access to is the D-Horse. Quite fitting that Big Boss is now riding around a white horse in the desert. The horse's basic function is to allow us to cross large open areas more quickly. Effectively, it's just a horse. I would say that it's probably the worst of the buddies because it doesn't provide that much utility. Each buddy has their own bond level, and the more that we use them in battle, the more that increases. At certain levels of bond, we can develop new items specifically for them. These can be different outfits, things that are entirely cosmetic, or useful upgrades that will make them more effective. In the case of D-Horse, he can get a battle dress that increases his defense in battle when equipped. The second buddy that we'll get access to is D-Dog. D-Dog is a small puppy that we find out in the wilderness during one of our first missions. He's actually entirely skippable because if you don't extract him back to Mother Base, then he just never becomes a part of the team. While D-Horse is quite unimpressive as far as the buddies in the game go, D-Dog is probably my personal favorite of them. D-Dog can sniff out things within a certain distance of him. He can mark animals that we can extract back to the base on our map. He can mark points of interest. And the most useful thing he can sniff out is enemies. D-Dog basically makes marking targets a thing of the past. As we infiltrate a base, he'll just sniff out everybody so that we don't have to. This makes things incredibly easy and prevents us from really ever having to do any sort of recon. He can also help us out in combat by attacking and killing enemies. We can even give him a little sneaking suit upgrade so that he can tag along with Snake in his infiltration missions. The third buddy is Quiet, and we'll get to her in a bit because she doesn't pop up in the story right away, and she's pretty important. The last buddy is a Walker Gear, which is basically a bipedal, manually operated mini Metal Gear. It can't launch nukes or anything like that, but we can outfit it with all sorts of weapons and features. I never used it too much because it always seemed like it restricted gameplay a little bit and kind of forces you to be loud, though you can equip it with tranquilizing bullets. In my opinion, the buddies are all great though, and they have their own uses. While I don't really prefer D-Horse, if you're looking to explore the open world, having him is kind of a must in the beginning, at least until you get some vehicles. They all have a specialty though, and definitely are aligned with certain styles of play. If you're somebody that likes to keep stealth, you might be more inclined to pick up D-Dog. If you're somebody that likes to explore the world, you might pick D-Horse. And if you're somebody that likes to slaughter Soviet soldiers, you might pick the Walker Gear. The Mother Base system as a whole is really just a fantastic upgrade to the systems that Peace Walker introduced. In Peace Walker, it felt great to manage your soldiers on a fulfillment level. It felt really good to capture soldiers out in the field and to come back to Mother Base to find a place for them. Then getting rewarded for your work felt like something that was earned. It was a satisfying system, but MGS5 takes that even further. There's just more here this time around, and the systems all work really well together. It also never feels like we're too underpowered to be taking on the missions that we have to. There was never a moment in MGS5 where I felt like I needed to grind other missions to level up my base so that I could unlock something that I needed. It was a slow increase in power and weaponry over time that felt incredibly satisfying once I got there. All of the craziest and best weapons in the game, once they're fully upgraded, feel like a reward for interacting with the game as much as you have. Mother Base as a system and an environment has a lot more up its sleeve when it comes to the rest of the game, but I think it's finally time to talk about the story of Metal Gear Solid 5. Metal Gear Solid 5's story is set up in episodes. Each of these episodes are usually one mission in the game and represent just a small chunk of the story that the game offers. There are often side ops, though, that are mandatory and fit into the story as well, providing more context or introducing a particularly important character. After Snake leaves Mother Base, we can begin Episode 3, A Hero's Way. Most of our missions as Diamond Dogs are given to us by some sort of client. Whether that client is someone on Mother Base, whether it's a mysterious benefactor, whether it's a father who's lost his son. These missions are all provided by someone, and often the mystery behind who gave us the mission becomes a story in and of itself. The first mission that we receive is to take out a Soviet commander. Now, there's a lot of information that isn't given to us directly through the game. Some information is offered up in side ops, and other information is given to us through cassette tapes. We gain a lot of cassette tapes throughout the game. When completing missions, when viewing certain cutscenes in the story, these cassette tapes can be played at any time, and while some of them are mandatory because they contain pivotal information for the narrative, other cassette tapes are just providing contextual information about the world, characters, or conflicts in this setting. We will find some information in there about Afghanistan and the conflict that we're heading into. If you don't look at this information, then you really mostly have no idea what's going on in this area outside of a few little tidbits. So Snake woke up in a hospital in Cyprus. Cyprus was split between the North and the South in a civil conflict, but where Snake was put is a place called Dhekelia. This was a buffer zone between this conflict. When he was picked up by Ocelot, they took a whaling ship and made their way to Afghanistan. The Soviets have invaded Afghanistan, and their tensions with the rest of the world's nations have started to grow. This is mounting into effectively a second Cold War. But when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, an invasion that was supposed to be over quickly because of the difference in technologies, this changed things. The West began to back the Mujahideen rebels that were fighting against the Soviets. But the Soviets are taking a scorched earth approach to this war. They're burning and killing anything left behind, and the refugees from this crisis are fleeing to Pakistan. Now the rebels are trying to get back at the Soviets, capturing them and torturing them brutally. And the cycle of vengeance goes on.
Then they burn down another village in retaliation. And the cycle of vengeance goes on.
In addition to this, in the absence of Snake and MSF, the surviving soldiers of Mother Base have had to find their own places in this world. They started joining and forming these things called PFs, or private forces. These private forces are mercenary companies that are really willing to work for anyone as long as the price is right. Think of them as the proto-versions of PMCs. But Snake and the Diamond Dogs technically aren't involved in this conflict. They'll be taking jobs that will force them to be involved, but ideally only in the background. The real thing that we're trying to get out of all of this is answers. XOF was the team that infiltrated Mother Base and destroyed the facility under the guise of a nuclear arms inspection team. They're a part of Cypher, but they are led by Skullface. Their objective was to kill Snake, but they failed, and every member of Diamond Dogs has their own reason for wanting to find Skullface and figuring out what he's up to. So we take out a commander, we destroy the comms equipment of some Soviet outposts, we extract a Soviet engineer who has experience with bionics, and eventually in Mission 6, we're given a job to find a new high-tech weapon called the Honeybee. This weapon is incredibly important because it was provided to the Mujahideen rebels by the West. The weapon can help them take out the Soviet gunships in the area. The Soviet gunships are really the only thing keeping the rebels down at this point. The choppers just tear through their ranks and they have no way to combat these vehicles. But the Honeybee can destroy them and is especially good against these ships because it ignores the flares that are set off to take the missiles off their routes. The Soviets have now captured this weapon, and if they get their hands on this tech, the rebels are screwed. We take this mission to infiltrate some nearby ruins and eventually find the Honeybee, but Snake is quickly knocked out and briefly captured by Skullface.
My, how you've changed. You became a demon for such little weapons as that?
After Skullface and his weird paranormal crew leave, we're forced to outrun, or to fight, the Skull Unit. Once again, they're probably a bit too strong for us at this point, so it makes sense to just hightail it out of there. I would like to point out that MGS5's story is pretty spread out, at least the big parts of it. We will often do 3 missions at a time with little to no actual cutscenes, just nuggets of information, passing us further along on our trail to the truth. So when I'm talking about the story here, I might be moving quickly through some of these missions because a lot of them don't really tie in to the rest of the story. But just know that I will point out critical information when that does come along, even if it's outside of cutscenes. After we retrieve the Honeybee, we take on a mission to eliminate 3 Soviet commanders at the same time. I should also note here that most, if not all of the missions where we have to eliminate people, allow us to extract them instead. We don't have to kill, that's just what the order suggests. We can often tranquilize these people and send them back to Mother Base, sometimes extracting more information out of them than we would have if they died, and of course, eventually turning them to our side to become a Diamond Dog. After this mission, we learn that Snake has started to make a name for himself among the Soviet soldiers. They've begun bolstering their bases and defenses in an effort to keep him out. We end up taking out a Soviet colonel next, and in probably one of my favorite missions, we have to take out as many Soviet vehicles as we can. These vehicles are moving to a new outpost and they come in waves. We have to just launch everything and prepare as we catch these vehicles on their patrol routes. If we aren't fast enough, then we can lose them as they ride off into the desert. The next mission sees us heading to rescue a Mujahideen prisoner named Malik. The client that sent us this mission was supposedly his father, who has already passed away. On the way to this mission, though, we're attacked by a sniper in some ruins. The sniper's name is Quiet, and we've been informed of her existence prior to this actual mission. Kaz will tell us beforehand that she's been taking people out in the area, and after she kills Soviet soldiers, they find no trace of her, hence the name. We then have to battle this sniper across the ruins. We can spot her location by noticing where the shots come from or the glare from her sight. Once we do this, we can mark her and try to sneak up to her position. The easiest way to resolve this battle is to call in a support drop on her location, which takes most of her health when the box falls and hits her head. Regardless of how we deal with this mission, we have her captive after the battle. It's clear that this sniper is working with Cypher. She's been taking out Soviets, and Cypher isn't directly behind them. It seems like she was sent here to kill Snake. Kaz clearly wants us to kill her. He has no love for anyone that's a part of the same organization that took everything from him, that took Mother Base, his comrades, and that took his arm and leg. Ocelot doesn't agree, though. He thinks she could provide some good information about Cypher, so he wants her brought back so he can interrogate her. We can actually kill her here. It's entirely up to us, but that's not really what you're supposed to do. Choosing not to shoot Quiet, we'll see Snake bringing her back to base with him, though he gets quite the protest from Kaz. She ends up escaping almost as soon as the helicopter takes off, using whatever strange powers she has to slip through the cuffs. Snake then heads back to Mother Base and is attacked by a fighter jet. As he's trying to defend himself, Quiet reveals that she's stowed away on the helicopter the whole time, and she uses her skills to shoot the pilot as the plane is coming at the chopper. Miller makes it clear once again that he will have her killed if she steps foot on base, though. When we bring her back, we're surrounded by soldiers, and Quiet shows that this is really no issue to her because she could probably take them all out at once. They end up deciding to put her in the brig, and Snake decides to keep her around at least until they can get some information out of her.
Boss, you are going to regret this. That woman...
I know. She knows our location. Either way, one of these days we're gonna have to kill her. But now is not the time. When the time comes, I'll pull the trigger.
With this, Quiet will be placed in her own special cell, mostly because she conflicts with a lot of the other soldiers on base. We can go visit her at a certain point to learn some more about her from Ocelot. Quiet doesn't actually speak, another reason for the name being so fitting. Ocelot thinks that she might just be mute, but this isn't the only uncommon thing about her. She also breathes through her skin. She doesn't even eat because she takes in food through light and water, photosynthesis. She's a strange beast for sure, and no one is really sure what makes her the way she is. For now, though, we have to get back to rescuing Malik, the guy we originally set out to extract when we got distracted by Quiet. The mission is just another general extraction, but once we get him out, he reveals to the team that he's never heard of the client who wanted him saved. His village was destroyed long before he was ever taken prisoner. His village caught some sort of disease and it was burned to the ground while he was out on a mission. Kaz thinks that Cypher may have sent the mission request so that Diamond Dogs would hand him over and they could silence him. How exactly they're involved isn't really clear.
Cypher's obviously up to something. This is probably just another preemptive cleanup operation to them. But to Malik, he lost his village, his family, everything, and he wants his revenge. In other words, he's one of us.
After this, we get a side ops request to go rescue Huey Emmerich. Apparently, since the event on Mother Base, Emmerich has been working with XOF and Cypher. He wants to defect, though, and return back to Mother Base. There's a lot of tension leading up to this mission because most assume that Huey was responsible, at least partly, for what happened on Mother Base 9 years ago. Huey was the one who invited the inspection team on the base. He was the one that suggested they comply with the IAEA. He was the one that ordered the soldiers to put down their weapons, so it made the group look less hostile. The group's theory is that Huey sold them out, invited XOF onto the base, and turned on them entirely. Well, if we find Huey, we might be able to find out the truth. We end up sneaking into a nearby power plant and find him working for Skullface. The two are arguing about whether a machine they're creating should be human-piloted or controlled by AI. Huey requests more time to make the final adjustments, and once Skullface finds out that Huey has contacted Big Boss, he pushes him down the stairs. This destroys and fractures the mechanical legs that he's using, the only thing that allowed him to walk. Skullface says that he's taking back Sahelanthropus, and Huey is taken to a different base. This immediately begins episode 12, Hellbound, where we have to track down Huey's new location. It's clear that Huey and Skullface were working on some type of advanced weaponry. This Sahelanthropus could be a big deal, and we need to find out what it is. We end up having to sneak into a massive base in Afghanistan. Not only is it patrolled by a Soviet gunship, but it's also crawling with soldiers and walker gears. Now, I haven't really talked about it so far, but gunships and vehicles are extremely dangerous in this game. If we're spotted by one of them and don't have nearby cover, it's basically game over. Of course, this is unless we happen to have a launcher on us that can take one of them out. The vehicles are a similar threat, just not as dangerous because they aren't patrolling in the air. I just want to point out this to say that when a gunship is involved in a mission, it completely changes the strategy that we have to approach that mission with. Of course, you can just blow it out of the sky, but where's the fun in that? Personally, I like to keep stealth as long as I possibly can. When we do get into the inside part of the base, we can find Huey's lab. He has an AI pod in here that looks just like the one from Peace Walker that were used on the machines in that game. It even has the same AI, with the boss talking to us as we enter. Snake ends up grabbing Emmerich and putting a bag over his head. We actually have the option to take the walker gear here, which is a much easier way to get out of the base. On the way out, Huey talks about the new weapons he's been developing for Cypher. He made the walker gear, which has already given them a huge advantage in battle. The new weapon he's made will be an even bigger threat. We quickly see this new weapon on the outskirts of the base as Skullface and the Floating Boy arrive to stop our way out of here. Skullface leaves us with Sahelanthropus, this upright bipedal weapon, and we have to run away from it. We aren't even close to strong enough yet to take it down, so we have to hide. This is a pretty intense sequence as we use small rocks for cover and this massive hulking machine stalks the road trying to find us. When we eventually get an opening, we can put Huey on the chopper and get out of there, but not before Sahelanthropus makes one last lunge for the vehicle and we have to shoot it down. Emmerich doesn't understand any of this because the machine wasn't complete yet. It wasn't even functional, but somehow they completed it without him. We then head back to Mother Base, where Huey is currently being tortured by Kaz and Ocelot. Emmerich still claims that he had nothing to do with the attack on Mother Base, that he only genuinely wanted to clear their names from the radar of the nuclear arms board. He then points the finger at Kaz, who admitted to working with Cypher at the end of Peace Walker, but Kaz turns this on Huey. The real reason they suspect him is because they all lost something that day. Kaz lost his leg and arm, Snake lost his own arm, Paz and Chico lost their lives, and they all lost their comrades. Huey came out without a scrape on him, so he's automatically suspect. They're giving him truth serum, but it doesn't seem to be working. They deduce that he must have had gene therapy or some sort of surgery to prevent it from having an effect. He's holding on to his story, but they need to be able to find proof to implicate him. They decide to keep Huey on the base, hidden away where the other soldiers can't find him. If they do, then he'll be killed, as the soldiers that were a part of MSF back in the day will want their revenge. Huey does give the group one good piece of information, though, that Cypher has been looking for the missing piece to their larger plan somewhere in Africa. They're trying to make a weapon that will surpass Metal Gear, and apparently part of that is in the Angola-Zaire border region. So that's where we head next. We get access to this whole new area. We can now travel to and from Africa at will just by selecting different missions and drop points that are set there. And it's kind of wild because Afghanistan is already pretty large on its own, with a ton of different bases, encampments, roads, and features to its landscape. Introducing another area with its own intricacies is just insane. The Africa area definitely isn't as big as Afghanistan, but it's still really interesting. Before we get into the story in Africa, I'd like to talk about the situation there, especially the info that we get from the cassette tapes, because it's pretty interesting and it's kind of important to the context of the story. So, Snake's legend has been spreading ever since he was in a coma, but the biggest issue with this is that it's created this large game of telephone where his ideals are misshapen the more they're told. It's almost like another pretty important character that he knew. He's now become an example that too much power will destroy those who wield it.
The moment any truth is passed on, it starts turning into fiction. The problem is, fiction inspires people more than facts.
This legend has created the private forces that are rampant all over Africa. Like I said, these private forces are sort of proto-versions of the PMCs that we would see in MGS4. There are three main ones though: CFA, Rogue Coyote, and Zero Risk Security. CFA is the contract forces of Africa. Zero Risk Security is actually sent all over the world and more spread out, and Rogue Coyote is centralized to Africa, the weakest of the three PFs. There's also a civil war going on here between the Buta and the Mbele. This fight has been going on since World War I, since their land was colonized and control was given to the Buta. Naturally, a power struggle then occurred. All of these things, in addition to child soldiers, resource troubles, and the involvement of Cypher, make up the list of conflicts that Africa is facing as we head there. Our first mission is given to us by an environmental NGO, or non-governmental organization. They want us to stop an oil spill that's happening at the Mafinda oil field. They want us to destroy the oil refinery being run by a rebel group called UNITA. They're being given American weapons, so it's safe to say that Cypher is probably involved. When we eventually arrive at the place and destroy the plant, we find out that a ton of bodies were located in the oil. The bodies have some sort of strange disease covering their chests. At the end of the mission, it's revealed that Saner, or South African Natural Resources, gave us the mission. In the original briefing, it's hinted at that Saner has something to do with the oil spill in the first place, that they come in and drain the area of oil and then disappear. Their equipment begins breaking down and leaking. They let the place be taken over by UNITA because they can blame it on them after the fact. But Kaz finds out that Saner is actually a shell company, and who is behind it remains a mystery at this point. It's probably Cypher, by the way. If there's ever a shell corporation in this game, you can just safely assume that old Skullface is in the background somewhere. After this mission, Huey lets Snake know that he customized a walker gear for him. This means we can actually use this as a buddy in combat now. Quiet also starts appearing again, showing that she wants to go out on missions with the boss. Quiet is a complicated beast at this point in the story. Kaz still absolutely hates her and believes that she shouldn't even be on the base, let alone alive. Ocelot has also taken a liking to her, especially because of her prowess with sniping and weaponry. Snake doesn't really seem to know how to feel, but Ocelot eventually convinces him to take her out on some missions. This is when we finally unlock Quiet as a buddy. Quiet is probably the best buddy in the game. I do prefer using D-Dog, but Quiet is truly some kind of overpowered. So Quiet has two functions, to scout and to kill. She can point out enemies to us. She does most of the things that D-Dog does, just not as effectively. D-Dog will often mark every enemy in a base, but Quiet will miss a lot of them. Her prowess with sniping is where her real use comes in, though. She can take out a ton of enemies, and we can upgrade her weapons through her own development tree. When we eventually get her a silenced sniper or even a trank sniper, she can help us clear out a whole base without having to do much work. She's also a fantastic distraction so that we can get into a base undetected. The reason I don't really like Quiet as much as D-Dog is because she's kind of like playing the game on easy mode. Personally, I want to take out the enemies, not have someone else do it for me. It is fun in certain circumstances, and I did use her quite a bit because I do prefer her over D-Horse or the Walker gear. The next main contract that we take in the episode 14 mission Lingua Franca sees us rescuing some British officials that were working in a PF that ran security for the oil field. He tells us that PFs in the area have been purchasing a ton of walker gears, and it's clear from Kaz's info that Cypher is probably supplying them. This gets even more complicated in the next mission when we find out that the walker gears are being supplied by the West. This doesn't make any sense because the walker gears were developed with the help of Huey to give to the Soviets. Kaz has found a convoy that crosses the desert regularly that might have some cargo that make this connection a little more clear. Whatever is in this cargo is what they're accepting as payment for these mobile weapons. In this mission, we track the convoy to a small village where it makes a brief stop. We can then head up to the convoy and try to extract it, but suddenly the Skull unit appears in the area. This is the first time we actually have to have open combat with the Skulls. We don't absolutely have to, but it's far easier than trying to extract a giant vehicle and then getting out of there quiet. We can use a ton of explosives and heavy weapons to try and take them out, but the easiest way to do it is to get into one of the tanks and start blasting them. After we do this, Kaz has the team at Mother Base analyze the material inside, and they find that it contains malachite and something called yellow cake. This is basically powdered uranium, but it's not a very large concentration, and definitely not enough for a nuclear weapon. Kaz needs to analyze this further, but the next mission quickly begins. We have to rescue 2 intel agents that were captured by the CFA. This mission is pretty simple, but when we find them, they're saying very strange things.
They kept saying the disease was her fault. Shouting at me. Over.
It looks like the CFA is trying to get back at Diamond Dogs for some sort of disease they think we caused. On top of that, the diseased bodies at the oil fields still remain a mystery. Something is going on here, but we don't have all the pieces yet. Something I want to point out about MGS5 that it does really well is just how it integrates its story into the game. I said before that there will be long stretches of gameplay where we don't have cutscenes. We don't have the main characters interacting on screen in some dramatic sequence or epic showdown, but that doesn't mean that there isn't story. The mission debriefings that we get at the beginning of a new infiltration provide context. The things that soldiers say during our missions, the conversations with Kaz or Ocelot at the end of a mission, all of these things are incredibly important to the plot. Even the cassette tapes that we find, while most of them are optional, a lot of them hold pivotal information that we won't be told in other places. And Metal Gear Solid 5 is subtle in the ways that it delivers its story. It's only there for those who are paying attention. It's very easy to skip over this military jargon at the end of a mission and just tune it out because the characters aren't present on screen. But this would be like ignoring the codec calls in MGS3. And sure, there may be missions where the only real information that we're getting is that the Soviets are advancing on another base, but this advancement may come into play later in the story. It may have been a small detail that will tie something together. For example, at first it doesn't really seem important that Saner were the ones behind the oil field incident, but once we learn that they're actually a shell company for Cypher, their name becomes a whole lot more important. I really enjoy this type of storytelling because it rewards extra attention, and there were a ton of concepts or themes that didn't fully click with me until I went back and took notes on all the cassette tapes in the game. But the story as a whole is really about to change. Episode 18 is when things start to take a bit of a turn, and the first chapter starts to really heat up. We get a contract from a general who wants us to eliminate 6 targets. They are soldiers that are under him, but they have private information that he doesn't want to leak. We infiltrate the base and take out one of the targets, but the other 5 are supposed to be at a nearby mine. When we get to the mine, we can take out every soldier there, but none of them are the targets. Exploring the whole mine leaves us with one place left to search, a mine shaft off to the side. Here we find that 5 child soldiers are being kept in a cage. They offer us diamonds for their lives, but Snake obviously chooses to spare them, regardless of payment. We then have to extract these kids in what is probably the hardest and most annoying mission in the entire game. Now, I feel very conflicted about this mission overall. After we gather the kids, we have to protect them all the way to the extraction point. It's basically an escort mission that heads down this narrow valley where we have to take out soldiers at each junction. Now, this isn't that bad in and of itself, but we also have to deal with soldiers flanking us from behind halfway through, a Soviet gunship chasing us, and the kids not listening to us and following our orders quite often. The kids mostly work like a buddy, so we can give them direct orders to stay or follow, but they'll only stay for a few seconds before they just start booking it towards a group of soldiers that are about to kill them. This means that we usually have to deal with a soldier and then return to the kids to tell them to stay again, rinse, and repeat, all while dealing with the gunships and the soldiers advancing on our position. It is really annoying, but I say I'm conflicted because I think the mission makes sense in the context of the narrative. These kids are scared. They are out of their element. They're unarmed. They just want to make it out of here alive. And Snake doesn't even speak their language, so he can't effectively communicate with them. They're just operating on instinct, and it makes sense that they would just run off after a few seconds without direction. This tests our patience as a player and also our view of these kids. Do we really, truly view them as innocent and give them the leeway that comes with that? Or do we implicate them further in this conflict with our anger and frustration? These are the two sides of this mission. On one hand, I feel like it fits, and on the other hand, I'm annoyed that I have to deal with it. When we eventually get back to the chopper, Snake loads the kids inside and we head back to Mother Base. Kaz, of course, doesn't totally agree with them being brought back, taking a bit more of a hardened approach to them, but Ocelot is pretty inviting as usual. Mother Base now has a facility where the kids can learn to read and write, do basic jobs, and develop skills, but this doesn't mean that they won't fight someday.
Behind the gun's what we do, boss. There's no room for angels in our heaven.
After we take on our next mission and extract a commander who was talking big about getting into nuclear arms recently, we find out that he was paid to spread that rumor by Cypher. After this, Huey shows us what he's been working on during his forced solitude. He's creating something called a battle gear. It's a small tank that can be sent out on deployments to aid the forces there. With this, we move on to the next story mission, which actually comes from a client inside of Mother Base, one of the kids we rescued from the mine. We have to seek out the Devil's House, which is a place that kids from the mine supposedly disappear to. Saner is involved with this place, so that means Cypher is probably behind it. When we get to the Devil's House, we find a makeshift hospital that's covered in blood and bodies. There are a ton of patients basically comatose on beds. They have some sort of speaker shoved into their throats, and these speakers are emitting audio from tapes. All of this is way out there, and we have no idea what any of this means yet, but Skullface shows up before we can even try to get any answers. The Man on Fire is with him, and we have to face off against him in a boss battle. He's actually pretty difficult because he can do a ton of damage to us and reflect our shots back at Snake. We can easily deal with him though by using a shotgun to slowly push him back into a pool of water, which takes care of him. After this, Kaz notes that the bodies in the Devil's House looked like the same ones in the oil field. They had some sort of lump on their chests. He's going to have the team at Mother Base do a thorough analysis of the audio that was recorded through Snake's presence there. The next mission is a pretty standard one that sees us heading to the airport to deal with an arms dealer. But as soon as we start this mission, we get the news that Mother Base is being attacked. We have to head there and retake our own base platform from the soldiers that are inhabiting it. Now, I really enjoy this mission because I love the idea of having to defend your own base. I love the idea of even setting a mission on Mother Base, especially when the base is built, customized, and crafted by us. This extends the point that I made further about being able to actually traverse the facility in the first place. It just makes everything feel more real, and turning that whole thing on its head by making us feel like the outsider by defending our home is fantastic. Of course, this also furthers the rage and protectiveness that both we and Snake would feel at the idea of our base being taken over. Snake certainly isn't going to let what happened 9 years ago happen again. The player doesn't want this to happen either, but they've also put time and effort into building this thing up. They've gathered these soldiers by hand. They've extracted these resources. We've built this. And just like Snake, we don't want anyone coming in here who isn't a part of Diamond Dogs, except Huey, but that's just so we can torture him. After this, we can head back to the previous mission and capture the arms dealer from the airport, and he tells us that Saner specifically requested his services. The next mission sees us heading into Masa Village, a place that child soldiers have recently taken over. Now, this is where the game decides to do something with its ideas that I don't think I've ever seen another game do. Metal Gear as a series has never shied away from condemning war. The first game was entirely about the nuclear threat. The second game was focused on the war for information and control. The third game was about the sacrifice of war. And the fourth game was about the monotony and commercialization of war. And Metal Gear Solid 5 is the same in that it does not shy away from showing the dirtiest parts of war. This mission is made up entirely of child soldiers, and there will be other missions and certain areas in the game from here on out that feature child soldiers. Child soldiers, as you probably already know, are a real thing. Countries will use children as a fighting force. Children tend to be easier to control and easier to get into battle, mostly because they don't understand the consequences of what they're doing. They can be misled and they can pick up a gun very easily. As of 2022, the UN identifies 12 countries that have used or use child soldiers. Colombia, the Central African Republic, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Mali, Somalia, South Sudan, Lebanon and Palestine, Syria, Yemen, Afghanistan, and Myanmar. These groups usually are non-state, so they're militias or guerrilla movements, and some of these groups have reduced their numbers over the years, but countries like Afghanistan and Syria are home to Islamist groups that have only grown their usage of child soldiers in recent times. Obviously, this is a big issue in the world and in war, and putting this into a game is incredibly uncomfortable. It's a painful truth that the player is forced with. Obviously, we can't kill these soldiers. We're only allowed to trank them. Big Boss wouldn't do that. But it still isn't fun to trank them. It isn't fun to treat them as soldiers. It isn't fun at all. And it shouldn't be, because this isn't a sequence that is trying to put forth fun. It's trying to show us something that we might not like looking at. At a certain point in the game, we can upgrade our Fulton balloons to try and bring more of these children into the organization, in the hopes that Diamond Dogs can give them a good life, that they will teach them skills until the age where they can understand the weight of using a weapon. And this gameplay mechanic, in some weird, odd way, is kind of a strange twist on the enemies get stronger as you make it further into the game trope. But instead of getting stronger, the enemies are getting weaker. So weak, in fact, that it would be morally wrong to kill them. This is turning our morals against us and restricting gameplay through morality rather than raw game design. During this mission, we have to seek out their leader, who is called the White Mamba. We eventually find him aboard a crashed ship and have to do battle with him. He will run all over the ship and try to take Snake out by attacking and then running away. We eventually get to him and take him back to the base. This kid's real name is Eli, but he is anything but cooperative once we get him back to Mother Base. During the next mission, where we have to extract some doctors who were in the area to investigate infectious diseases and were connected to the Devil's House, Kaz tells us something shocking. He wants to test Eli against Snake's DNA. He believes that he is one of the children that came from the Les Enfants Terribles project. We would know him as Liquid Snake, but Kaz isn't quite certain yet. He thinks things line up, and Eli's hatred for adults and mistrust of anyone in authority make him think it could be true, but he isn't sure. The doctors that we find during this mission tell us that they've never seen anything like what they saw at the Devil's House. All of the patients were having non-English tapes being transmitted into their throats. Kaz backs this up with the audio analysis that the team at Mother Base did. Everything they heard was a smattering of news broadcasts, commercials, plays, etc., but none of it was in English. We then take a mission to extract the commander of a group of child soldiers in Africa. Directly after this mission, though, something begins to happen on Mother Base. A ton of our soldiers are getting sick. They're getting blisters on their body, and the symptoms look strikingly similar to what we saw in the bodies at the oil field and at the Devil's House. Kaz and Ocelot can't seem to find the source of this sickness, but they know there has to be some sort of defining characteristic between all of the people that are getting sick. Here we can isolate certain people who are infected, but only if we know why they're getting infected. We're tasked with looking at the infected soldiers and finding a commonality between them. If we look hard enough, we eventually realize it's not anything physical. It's not their background or their expertise, it's the language they can speak. So up to this point, language has been an incredibly important part of Metal Gear Solid 5, not just in terms of story, but also in terms of gameplay. Pretty early on in the game, we find out that we can't interrogate people because they speak either Pashto or Russian, and Snake does not speak that language. This means we have to complete a side op to get interpreters for those two languages. Once we gain these interpreters, we can hear the things these soldiers are saying. This doesn't just come in handy during interrogation, though. It's also useful when we're overhearing conversations that guards are having. This goes for the Africa regions as well, with the Afrikaans and Kikongo languages. Language is also talked about quite a bit in the game. It's first mentioned at the end of Ground Zeroes when Skullface tells Paz that Zero stole everything from him, even his language.
I've never known choice. Where I was born, the language I speak, I've never had the freedom to choose for myself.
And the fact that we even need interpreters is proof of the symbol that Mother Base and Diamond Dogs have become. They are a nation without borders. They allow anyone into their ranks as long as they're someone that needs a home. A character that we haven't yet met but are quite close to being introduced to is Code Talker. In one of his cassette tape conversations, he likens Mother Base to a superorganism, or even something larger than that.
Well, it's an honor. You can travel the world, but you won't find another place like this. If the whole world was like this base, I think the peoples of the world would bid farewell to fighting for good. Maybe that's what the boss wanted in the end.
But this spread of people proved to be Mother Base's weakness in the end. Their greatest strength is becoming their downfall. The Kikongo language is actually what's causing the infection. We aren't exactly sure why just yet, but we have to quarantine these people or they'll infect more soldiers and we'll start losing mass amounts of people from the base. Our main mission now becomes trying to stop this infection, or at least to learn more about it in the hopes of finding some sort of cure or prevention. In the next mission, we rescue an intel team member who tells us about a man named Code Talker who knows how to treat the pathogen we're dealing with. We can infiltrate a nearby mansion to find him as he's already been captured and employed by Cypher. Before we do this, we have to fight the Skulls once again, but this time in a sniper battle in a ravine.
I've been waiting, Tilly. Or should I say,
Code Talker tells us that there's a parasite amongst our people. It infects the vocal cords, and when certain vibrations are made by the vocal cords, like a specific language, they begin to reproduce. At this point, it infects the lungs and kills the host. He has an herb that will prevent the spread of the disease for a bit, but there's no official cure, just a way to halt the symptoms. The microbe will turn all of the male parasites into females, which will prevent them from reproducing. Code Talker was being forced to work for Skullface to develop these vocal cord parasites. He also created the parasites that power the skulls.
Skullface. Even a country like America sways in his wake. I could not defy him. The fate of Ennio lies in his hands. However, perhaps the Nishia let you hear. If my children have upset the Rojun of the world, it falls to me to set it right.
He says that Skullface's goal is to wipe out every language except English off the earth. Code Talker agrees to work with us. Obviously, he didn't want to help Skullface in the first place, he was being forced to. But now he's motivated by something greater, to make things right for what he has brought into this world. On the way back to Mother Base, we're attacked by the Skull unit one final time, and we have one more battle with them. By this point, we can actually take them on in a battle, using launchers and explosives to get rid of them. We're strong enough now that we won't get blasted by them as soon as the fight starts. After we get Code Talker out safe, he gives us a ton of really good information. He's just about the first big breakthrough that we have in the story, and the first person that gives us some real answers on what the fuck is going on. Apparently, Skullface was testing nukes around 5 years ago. Now, he was using Code Talker to find a way to prevent nuclear detonation through the use of a device. The metallic archaea, which is something Code Talker developed through the use of parasites, will allow him to safely transport nuclear materials without being detected. In addition to that, he can also deactivate these nukes anytime he pleases. He plans to make nukes available to the world, but includes the deactivation plan in case someone tries to use it against someone that Skullface wants protected. So Skullface not only plans to arm the world, but also plans to eradicate all of the languages on Earth, except for English. Code Talker then gives Mother Base the Wolbachia treatment that will prevent the disease from spreading throughout their base. We then see Huey being interrogated again. He also finally lets up and decides to give us some useful information. Apparently, Sahelanthropus is about to be unveiled to the world. It's meant to scare the world into wanting to buy nukes so that he can be the one to sell them. The weapon is being held in OKB-0, a lab that was built by the Soviet philosophers. This begins the final 2 missions in Chapter 1. I'd like to talk about the infiltration to OKB-0 for a second, because it's probably some of the best stealth that the game has to offer. This is our final big stealth mission for this section of the game, and it really feels like the culmination of everything that we've learned and seen thus far. It's this massive fortress located on top of a hill that's just crawling with soldiers, and the whole thing is monitored by gunships. People are everywhere here, and we have to put in so much effort just to find a viable way through to get to our objective. Sometimes that means waiting for guards to move until there's a small opening. Sometimes that means taking out guards so that we can create an opening. Sometimes that means going in loud. It's no different than the rest of the game, but it's just amped up to 100 and really feels like the stealth climax that this game was working towards. It's worth noting as well that it's only XOF here now. They've taken over the base as all of the Russian soldiers have died from the Russian version of the vocal cord parasite that was released here. We eventually get to the helipad to find Skullface trying to make his exit.
You too have known loss, and that loss torments you still. You hope hatred might someday replace the pain, but it never goes away. It makes a man hideous, inside and out. Wouldn't you agree?
Both are demons. Our humanity won't return. You, me, we've no place to run, nowhere to hide.
And that is why I'll show you my demon.
Skullface decides to humor Big Boss. He takes him down to a small jeep so that they can head to where Sahelanthropus is being held. And on the way, Skullface is going to show us his demon, meaning he's going to explain everything. Skullface reveals that he was originally part of a cleanup crew that worked on Snake's missions. He worked for the CIA and even supported the Virtuous mission in MGS3. He was meant to be there as backup to clean up after Snake's mission, whatever he needed to be. XOF was existing in the shadow of the Fox unit. Zero ended up forming Cypher and enlisted Skullface as its commander. He wanted to unite the world, and part of that was uniting America. He felt that America was too segmented. Since it was made up of so many peoples, so many cultures, it broke off into its own little groups. So he had to use words to control their subconscious.
To unite America and the entire world. The Major thought this was his friend's will. But I think he never understood what she wanted.
But Skullface never related to Zero. Skullface lost his mother tongue when he was young. When his village was raided and he was torn away from his family, he was forced to speak other languages. Each time he changed to a different post and had to learn to speak new, he felt himself change. He noticed the way that he looked at things differently, that his personality was skewed. He feels like he was robbed of his mother tongue, of his original language, his home language. Zero never had this experience. He spoke English, and now he wants to spread that language across the world to exert his control. Skullface wants revenge on Zero and all those who'd leech off the words of their fellow man. Zero uses codes as a means of control, and the mother tongue of these codes is English. So Skullface has a final strain of the vocal cord parasite, the English strain. He plans to wipe out all of the English language, the real way to get back at Zero, to put him through what he went through.
People will swallow their pain. They will link lost hands. The world will become one. This war is peace.
Skullface plans to unveil Sahelanthropus, which will set his plan in motion. This will send the world into another Cold War, forcing them to buy nukes from him, nukes that he controls, and he will control language when he wipes out English. He then brings out the big weapon, but quickly it's overtaken by the floating boy and the man on fire, who seem to have gone rogue. The man on fire is crushed during the movement, and we have a battle on our hands. We have our final boss battle with Sahelanthropus, and when we last encountered it, we couldn't quite stand toe-to-toe. But now we're outfitted with enough power to take the thing down. We have to launch everything we have at it, firing launchers, grenades, C4, anything that explodes. The weapon will summon all kinds of rocks and shoot its railgun our way, but once we manage to avoid these attacks and destroy it, the thing lunges at us. The floating boy appears for one final second as we launch our last missile at its head and destroy the weapon before it ever has a chance to be unveiled to the world. Miller and Snake head back to the base where Sahelanthropus was unleashed. Skullface was crushed by rubble when the weapon made its exit. We find 2 of the English vocal cord parasites there, but the third one is missing. He tells Snake that it's close to him. Snake and Miller decide to get their revenge for everything that's happened to them, for everything that Skullface did. They fill his body full of lead, but he doesn't die. They leave him begging for death, only to hear one final shot ring out as Huey lands the killing blow.
Did it! Revenge!
There's something about this scene, and honestly, it leads me into a good point. Aside from one final scene, which we'll get to in a second, this is the end of Chapter 1. Chapter 1's title is fittingly made out to be Revenge. This is what a lot of the chapter focuses on. And not only the revenge that the characters want and the cycle of revenge, but the different ways that they experience grief, loss, pain, and ultimately wanting some sort of payback for those emotions. Huey experiences this revenge in possibly the most chilling way you could imagine. This exclamation as he takes the life of another man that he had almost no part in taking out is honestly chilling. It shakes me to my core, and part of this is the way that it's depicted. We first see Snake and Miller's revenge. Snake doesn't talk for a lot of Metal Gear Solid 5. He isn't one to interject himself often in scenes. He really never has outside of asking leading questions, but for most of MGS5, he's pretty quiet. Snake does seem to want revenge though. He wants payback for what was done to him, what was taken from him. But he doesn't seem bloodthirsty. He isn't ready to burn the world down to get back at Skullface. Miller, on the other hand, is. He often reveals his extreme feelings on the matter, that he will gain payback for what was done to Mother Base, for the comrades that they lost.
Rubbing our noses in bloody battlefield dirt. All for revenge. The world calls for wet work, and we answer. No greater good. No just cause.
God. Cypher sent us to hell.
But we're going even deeper.
Deeper into hell, Miller will have to tread to get his revenge. He displays this through his mistrust for anyone that is outside of their organization, his mistrust of Quiet, his mistrust of the children, even just the cold and bitter demeanor that he addresses others with. He is ready to go to whatever lengths he needs to feel satisfied for what he lost, to make the scales of justice even. Ocelot is someone we haven't talked about a lot in this story, but he isn't really seeking revenge at all. He's just here to help Snake rebuild, and he seems to have a much cooler head than the rest. He obviously wasn't involved in the Mother Base attack 9 years ago. He's meant to balance out Miller in a way, an angel and a devil on Snake's shoulder, pushing him in one direction or the other. Skullface himself wanted revenge on Zero. He supplanted his anger and rage onto Zero. He was a conduit for the people that had wronged him over the years. And he took this out on Zero by harming everything that Zero wanted, taking out as many innocents as he possibly could along the way. Even Eli had some sort of revenge that he wanted to exact on the adults of the world. While we're on the subject of Eli, we do get feedback at a certain point in the story that Snake is not his father. The DNA test came back negative, they didn't match at all, so he can't be a clone of Big Boss. This is not Liquid Snake. But Eli still thinks that this is true, so he resents Big Boss for the way that he's had to grow up, the things that he's had to deal with, the struggles he's already experienced in his life. This extends to all adults and forms of authority. He wants to cause trouble, to cause chaos, to make up for his lacking genes. Code Talker is the only one that seems to internalize his grief and pain in a somewhat healthy way. There's a cassette tape where Miller and Code Talker speak about the thirst for revenge and how it feeds on the mind.
You know, we defeated Skullface, but it didn't lessen our pain. It's a pain we'll never be rid of. I see that now, but I thought I could burn it away. In the end, all I burned was our own men.
Infectious diseases, parasites. Without such foreign enemies, the immune system will start attacking the body, developing allergies and autoimmune diseases. The same is true of organizations.
And Code Talker has plenty of reasons to be upset, to want revenge for what was done to him. He understands the importance of language just like Skullface does. Code Talker was part of the Navajo tribe in the United States. He was forced into a government schooling program for Native Americans, and he was forced to speak their language. He was robbed of his own language, one that's already dying within its own people. Code Talkers were actually soldiers in World War II who used Navajo words to speak in code. The words were not accurate, they just knew that no one would be able to decipher it because virtually no one outside of the US spoke that language. Skullface found Code Talker and forced him to research parasites for him. Code Talker was already intrigued by the parasites, which actually came from the body of the End, by the way, a little piece of information that's tucked away in the cassette tapes. Skullface told Code Talker that he would kill the Dine, or the members of his Navajo community, if he didn't help him. Code Talker has experienced very similar pain and trauma to Skullface. He has lost his own language, he has been forced to use another name, and he has seen his people threatened. But he does not yearn for revenge like the rest of the group does, because he knows that he has no choice but to live with that pain. So when Huey lays the final shot into Skullface's head and exclaims, "Revenge," it seems all the more chilling in the end. And when Snake and Miller see this, we have to imagine that they too are in shock, that they self-reflect for a moment to try and see if they're any different than this untrustworthy man that lies in front of them. The scene that follows shows the group at Mother Base, watching as the destroyed Sahelanthropus is delivered back to the base.
We hold our rifles in missing hands. We stand tall on missing legs. We stride forward on the bones of our fallen. Then, and only then, are we alive. This pain is ours, and no one else's. A secret weapon we wield, out of sight. We will be stronger than ever, for our peace.
Miller makes a statement here that really develops his character quite a lot. It shows a ton of growth and delivers one of the most powerful messages that this game has to offer. That the pain they felt isn't meant to be destroyed. It isn't meant to be cast aside. It is a weapon. It's part of them, just like anything else. You can't get rid of your shadow. You can't get rid of your phantom. You can only make peace with it. This is in stark contrast to how a lot of games and media treat revenge as a theme. It's usually this very vapid, surface-level condemnation of revenge, something showing off revenge as a cycle where it hurts both the person who was wronged and the person who does the wrongdoing. No one in this group has decided to break that cycle. They've still taken their pound of flesh, but they have decided to live with their pain, and that's a triumph in the end. The Phantom Pain does not just put forth a surface-level understanding of grief and vengeance, it makes a best-effort attempt at trying to understand these emotions while bringing the player along through those emotions. The player has felt what these people have felt as well. Maybe not nearly as strong, but when Mother Base was destroyed, those were our soldiers we lost. That was our base that we built. When we played Peace Walker, we believed. We wanted to make this nation and build it up stronger than we could ever imagine. So when Skullface takes it down, we feel that pain too. It's not just the characters, but the player as well that has to make peace with their pain. They have to learn to wield and live with it. But this really only scratches the surface of what Metal Gear Solid 5 has to say, because this isn't the end of the story, and what Chapter 2 has to say about the world, relationships, and the player is possibly some of the strongest messaging that Kojima has ever put forth. At this point in the game, we begin Chapter 2, Race. Skullface is gone, but the parasites are still a threat. Kaz wants to combat this by getting more strength, more numbers, more men. We can also develop nuclear weapons at this point in the game. This is kind of tied into the online mode and the last section of the game, so I'll talk about that when we get there. As you'll quickly see though, Chapter 2 is a lot more focused on the people, the survivors, and the things they're dealing with. Rather than a large-scale conflict, stopping a massive weapon, or trying to go against some large organization, a lot of the enemies come from within. The first simple mission that we have to take on is to extract a CIA agent that was working inside of OKB-0. He knows about the vocal cord parasites, and we can't let him leave because America can't know about what happened here. After this, we find out that one of the child soldiers has died in an accident on one of the platforms. It's pretty quickly suspected that Eli had something to do with this. We can also take a side op at this point to go retrieve the AI pod that Huey had in his base, and another to secure the remains of the man on fire. Now, the AI pod will become important in just a little bit, but first let's talk about the man on fire. Once we recover his body, we learn that the man on fire was actually Volgin. Yes, that Volgin from MGS3. His story is pretty much tied to the floating boy at this point, so we might as well kill two birds with one stone. We find out through cassette tapes and other information that Volgin was transferred to a medical facility after MGS3. He never truly died. He was basically just in a comatose state. The facility was doing experiments to try and find the source of the lightning powers that he had. In an act of pure coincidence, the floating boy, or the third child, or as we know him, Psycho Mantis, was flying over this facility in a plane at the time. Psycho Mantis was a child with psychokinetic abilities and was being researched by an institute. This boy could feel the rage and fury coming off of Volgin, even in his comatose state. The way that Psycho Mantis works in this game is that he basically latches himself onto whoever is feeling the strongest emotions near him at the time. His powers will then aid them in whatever they want with those emotions. At certain points, he latches on to Skullface, the man on fire, and even Eli. This change is reflected in his appearance, whether he has fire on his outfit or has a small mask on. This shows who is basically controlling him at that time. So when he felt the emotions of Volgin, it woke the man out of his coma and brought him back. These emotions were so strong because he felt Snake awakening from his slumber as well. His feelings of revenge at Big Boss led him to seek him out, and this is the reason for the attack on the hospital. But as we see the story progress, things change, and the floating boy is taken over by feelings around him that are stronger. For example, at the end of Chapter 1, Eli has stowed away on the chopper that's waiting nearby. His emotions of fear and anger are stronger than Volgin's in this moment, so he takes over Psycho Mantis. This allows his emotions to control Sahelanthropus, which is the reason it kills Volgin and ends up crushing Skullface. The floating boy in MGS5, if you aren't already aware, is another example of a parasite. An unknowing parasite, but he has no control over his powers. Not yet, at least. He's a far cry from the memory-reading Psycho Mantis that we see in MGS1. He basically exists as a conduit for these powers, and like parasites in nature, just trends towards the situation that benefits him best. Shortly after we recover the body, we find out that Code Talker's research has been stolen and is being shipped out in containers. We need to get this back so that he can effectively work to eliminate the vocal cord parasites. We then see a scene of Quiet being interrogated. Kaz has gotten it into his head that she was the one that unleashed that parasite on Mother Base in the first place. She refuses to talk even when he tries to suffocate her by splashing chemicals on her skin. They found out through the medical tests that her lungs are fried, most likely from the parasites that she holds. They even found a white star of Bethlehem in her lungs, proving that she was at the hospital and was the assassin that tried to kill Snake. Ocelot eventually gives her some reprieve because he realizes that she will not talk no matter what they do. I think Ocelot realizes something more about interrogation than the rest, that it's not necessarily about inflicting pain to the subject, but about convincing them. There are studies that have shown that physical torture is really not a good method of getting information out of people. And Ocelot is touted in the game as being an expert at interrogation. He gets things out of his subjects that others wouldn't be able to. By the time we see him again in MGS1, he's just straight up torturing people again, though. After the group leaves, Code Talker speaks to Quiet in Navajo. She speaks back to him, and he realizes that she's the one with the English strain of the parasite. She refuses to speak because she doesn't want to spread it to the base, even if it means getting tortured. Over the next couple of missions, we're told that there's a radiation leak on the medical platform. Kaz is worried about it, but Huey assures us that it won't spread. Things get even worse when we find out all of the kids have escaped. Eli put them up to it, and now they're out there roaming the world. We have to take on a few side ops to rescue all of these kids. But as soon as we get them back, Eli and the kids escape a final time, this time taking Sahelanthropus with them. They of course can't just wander around with this incredibly powerful weapon, but it doesn't actually work. It took damage in the battle, and it was only being powered by the floating boy anyways. Snake really wanted to keep it as a trophy, as a symbol that the Diamond Dogs could build something and stop evil from spreading in the world. We then learn that Huey was the one that helped them escape. He showed them how to get the weapon working again, because, of course, when is Huey not involved? Everything begins to break down at this point, as Snake is alerted that another vocal cord parasite outbreak has happened on Mother Base. The Wolbachia treatment isn't working anymore for some reason. Code Talker thinks it could be some sort of mutation of the virus, but he isn't sure. The people that have been infected are quarantined in a facility on the base. Snake offers to go inside and check if there's any survivors and try to find the source of this mutation. This begins probably the best mission in the entire game, Episode 43, Shining Lights, Even in Death. The new strain of this disease has no physical symptoms, so there really isn't a way to tell who is infected, and it's spreading even faster because people who barely spoke the language started becoming symptomatic. We wander through this infected facility, looking at each of the soldiers who have either died or are currently infected with the virus. The game makes a point to note the names of the soldiers above their heads as we mark them. Once we get to the top, we find a researcher who is wearing infrared goggles. These were allowing him to see who was infected because their throats glow when viewed through these lenses, emitting some sort of heat. He says that he won't become a snail as he finally dies. It isn't clear at first what he means, but the infected are trying to rush outside. This is because the parasites are controlling them and they want to spread as fast as they possibly can. By dying outside and having the birds feast on their corpses, the disease will spread across the sea and eventually the world. The snail reference is really only explained in the cassette tapes. There's a specific parasite that uses snails as hosts. This forces the snails into the light where they swell up, and their antennae change to resemble caterpillars. This causes them to get eaten by birds so the parasites can spread. But with this situation, infected soldiers start rushing towards the door, trying to head outside. If this happens, Mother Base won't be the only doomed place, it'll be everywhere. Snake is then forced to kill these soldiers rushing outside. We then control Snake as we have to systematically head back through the facility, killing any soldiers that have the infection. There's no other way. This mission is just so fucking brutal. These are our soldiers. This is our base. And there's no decision to make here. This is just something that must be done. But forcing this trigger on the player brings out emotion like no other sequence I've seen before. The ending to this sequence is even more hard to grapple with, as we find a room of soldiers that are arguing over whether they should leave or not. They're all infected, but they decide that since Big Boss is here, they'll go with whatever he chooses. And as we start to shoot them, they don't even flinch. They don't recoil as they know death is coming. They accept it willingly, because this is how far they will go to trust Big Boss, to trust this organization. It is truly gut-wrenching. Snake then finds one soldier who isn't showing the glow in his throat. He isn't infected, but before we get him outside, somehow the disease has already spread. He's showing signs and we have to kill him. The game doesn't even let us have this. It is unrelenting. It won't even let us have one survivor. They're all dead. I should also note here that while this is all happening, Huey is screaming over the comms at Snake. He is condemning Snake for what he's doing, for killing his own men, for turning on them like this. They were supposed to be a family, and Snake has betrayed them. But this isn't true. Snake has to do this to save the rest of them. He's making a choice here, but it isn't really a choice. And it's incredibly easy to sit back from the sidelines and condemn someone when they have to make the hard choices. We'll be wrapping up Huey's story in a second here, but before that, we get what is possibly the best scene in the entire franchise. Diamond Dogs gets together on one of the platforms of Mother Base with the cremated bodies of the soldiers that died. They are ready to pour their ashes into the sea, to let them float along the waves. But Snake wants to do it himself.
I won't scatter your sorrow to the heartless sea. I will always be with you. Plant your roots in me. Diamonds.
Snake decides that he wants to turn their ashes into small diamonds that they'll all wear on their uniforms. These soldiers won't be forgotten. They won't be lost to time. They will be with the Diamond Dogs always. In this way, Snake has learned to use his pain, to use his grief as a weapon, to make it a part of him, to not push away the past or try to get someone back for it, but to move on with those memories still intact.
Mission list updated.
I don't know how you do it. All I could do was obsess over revenge, doubting my comrades along the way. But even after all we've accomplished, the phantom pain never let up. No. If anything, it just got worse. But you understood that from the start, didn't you? From the moment you opened your eyes in that hospital, you knew it wouldn't go away. Yet you've been fighting the pain and confronting your phantoms the whole time. Knowing full well the battle would never end, not till the day you die. I respect that now, more than ever. It's an honor and a privilege, Big Boss.
After this, we get access to a cool little mission where we can rescue Kojima once again. He's in the same place that Miller was captured in.
What took you so long?
But we're quickly brought back to Mother Base once again because the soldiers have started to riot. They become aware of Huey's presence on the base, and word has spread about his implications in the destruction of the original Mother Base. So what exactly has Huey done? Well, first of all, he invited the committee into Mother Base for an inspection of nuclear arms. This turned out to actually be XOF, and they destroyed Mother Base, killing most of the soldiers there, wounding Snake and Miller, and putting Snake into a 9-year coma. Now, did Huey actually do this on purpose? Or was he fooled into thinking that this was an actual inspection team? We aren't really sure. The game makes a point to never really provide any damning evidence either way. His other crime that he's now being tried for is assisting Eli and the kids with stealing Sahelanthropus. This one has little to no evidence to support it, and it just seems like it's an accusation because it was the machine he created, so he would be the only one that would know how to get it working. Honestly, Huey seems innocent of this one because the floating boy was probably what helped the kids get it out in the end. He did show them some stuff related to it, but I don't think he intended to have them steal it. Huey's third crime is mutating the virus on Mother Base. Huey happened to have ordered a new X-ray machine that malfunctioned shortly before the outbreak. This X-ray machine turns out to be what caused the outbreak. The radiation caused the Wolbachia treatment to mutate and actually have the opposite effect on the parasite. Technically, this is Huey's fault in the end, sort of, but we can't ever really be sure if Huey did this on purpose. It could have just been an accident. His final crime is killing Dr. Strangelove. If you remember, Huey and Dr. Strangelove sort of started up a fling at the end of Peace Walker. It's revealed that Strangelove departed from Mother Base before it was destroyed. She then ended up being brought in to help Huey work on Sahelanthropus because she was skilled in AI. After we recover the AI pod, we find out that her body is inside the thing. She was trapped inside and suffocated. There is a very long, somewhere around 10-minute recording of her death in the AI pod. It is just as brutal as the rest of the game, and Strangelove spends her last moments with this AI that still has the remnants of the boss's programming.
Perhaps I'd have made it. Why didn't I stop the hatch from closing? Even if it meant losing an arm.
She was in love with the boss and takes solace in the fact that she gets to hear her voice as she passes away. Now, Strangelove and Huey had a child named Hal somewhere in these past 9 years. This is obviously Otacon, and it's revealed at a certain point that Huey let Hal sit in the cockpit of Sahelanthropus and pilot the machine briefly. This is then added to his list of crimes, that he forced his child to be used as a pilot because he could fit in the cockpit and a full-sized human wouldn't be able to. Now, honestly, there really isn't proof for Huey killing Strangelove either. He claims that Skullface did it, and then later he claims that she committed suicide. He implicates himself because he keeps switching his story, and the tape doesn't reveal who the killer is. So why are Kaz and Ocelot persecuting him like this? Why are they judging this man for crimes they aren't sure that he committed? This all ties back into the theme of revenge that the game plays on. Miller especially wants Huey's head on a spike. He blames Huey for everything that has happened to them, and ever since they got him back to Mother Base, he has been searching and trying to find some proof that he did something bad, so that he could execute him, so that he could take out his anger and pain on someone. And it makes sense to implicate Huey. He lies a lot. There are times in the same interrogation where he changes his story, goes back on details, gets things wrong, and none of it really adds up. It all depends on how you look at it in the end. Huey could have just been mistaken about the inspection. He could have just been letting Hal into the cockpit because he thought it was fun. He could have just ordered a faulty piece of equipment. He could have just been showing Sahelanthropus to the kids because he was proud of it. He could have been absent when Skullface killed Strangelove. Or he could have invited XOF to Mother Base to save himself. He could have been using his son to test out this new Metal Gear. He could have planned to mutate the Wolbachia to take out more of the soldiers at the request of Cypher. He could have used more kids as the test pilots for Sahelanthropus, and he could have pushed Strangelove into the AI pod. We can't really know which side of this whole thing Huey lands on because we don't have the facts. We don't have proof of any motivation for really any of these situations. Kaz and the soldiers on Mother Base want Huey killed, but in the end, Snake decides to show him mercy. He wants to exile him from Mother Base, to put him in a life raft and send him out to sea. Obviously, we know that Huey survives because he goes on to take his own life and almost kill his daughter Emma in the process. But the point here is that it doesn't matter if Huey is innocent or not. It doesn't matter if he's guilty and did all of these things with ill intent. The point the game is trying to make is, once again, the contrast to how he deals with these things. No matter what happens, Huey blames others for the things that he may have had a hand in. It doesn't matter what way you look at it, Huey had a part in what happened to Mother Base. Inviting the inspection teams to the base was something that Kaz and Snake never wanted to do, but Huey was gung-ho about clearing their name and even said that he would take the blame if anything happened. But that's never the case. Huey doesn't take any of the blame. Even from the first time that we meet him in this entry, he's already blaming Snake and telling him that he should have never had a nuke in the first place.
I had no idea. I thought the inspection was real. I swear it. If anyone's to blame, it's you. We should never have had that nuke. That's the reason Mother Base was destroyed.
This is among the last things that he says to us before he's exiled from the base.
Snake! You should be in this boat! There'd have been no inspection if it weren't for your precious nuke! I risked my life life trying to save you all! How can you do this? Am I the only sane one here? It's not my fault.
And this isn't the case with Snake. I would understand if Huey was blaming Kaz, because Miller absolutely has it out for him, but Snake never blames Huey for what happened. He's just letting Miller and Ocelot get to the bottom of what was really going on. It's not like he loves the guy, but he's pretty far from condemning him. But that's all Huey does, condemn Snake for what happened. He also tries to claim that everything he did was for them, for Mother Base, that he was supposed to be a part of the family. If that was the case, then he would have shared in communal commiserating over what they've lost, not rejoicing in death and revenge, bathing in that emotion. It doesn't matter if Huey is guilty or innocent. It matters how he feels, and he shows those feelings time and time again.
You can't discard your phantoms forever, Doctor.
Son of a bitch will make it, you know. I can see it now. In no time, he'll be telling tales about the black-hearted Diamond Dogs. The Shining White Knight, blabbering on about our injustice, hiding behind his fool's idea of morality. And all the other fools will stand around, nodding with every word he says.
No. One day he'll see through the lies he's built up, realize what kind of man he really is. What goes around comes around. You can't run from yourself forever.
Shortly after this, we get word that Quiet has left Mother Base, and we get a mission to go rescue her once she gets captured by the Soviets, but only after we've fulfilled some requirements. We first have to get Quiet to maximum bond level if we haven't used her that much throughout the game. Only once this is maxed out will Quiet actually leave the base and get captured by the Soviets. Now, we don't yet know why Quiet left Mother Base. In the mission briefing, though, Code Talker reveals to Snake that Quiet had the English strain of the vocal cord parasite. She was choosing not to speak so that she didn't spread the parasite. She refused the Wolbachia treatment the whole time, though, because some part of her still wanted revenge. But after the mutation and the infection on Mother Base, she realized that she couldn't predict what the parasites would do and had to leave. The only problem with this is that Quiet still has this strain, and Kaz in particular doesn't trust her to wander around with it. Snake also doesn't want her to die at the hands of the Soviets, so we have to go save her. When we find Quiet, she's captured, but it becomes pretty clear that she doesn't need our help, as we see her take down these soldiers with relative ease. Snake chooses to save her in the end, and we have to defend the base from a slew of soldiers and tanks. Once we complete this mission, Snake carries Quiet to the extraction chopper, but since they're caught in a dust storm, they have to hide out and wait. Snake ends up getting hurt and passes out. Quiet finds him losing consciousness and tries to call in the chopper, but they can't understand Navajo. She tries to get their attention over and over, but she realizes what she has to do. She has to speak English and direct the chopper here, or Snake will be killed. When Snake wakes up, she's gone, but we find a tape nearby that she left for him. She had feelings for Snake, but her only language was revenge.
But the words we shared... No, that was no language at all. That is why I chose the language of gratitude instead and go back to silence. I am quiet. I am the absence of words.
With that, we have one more final mission to talk about here. The last mission of the game is called Episode 46, Truth, the Man Who Sold the World. This mission only triggers after we have completed every other main mission, aside from the higher difficulty repeats. We must complete all of the mandatory side ops, and most resources online say that we have to complete all of the platforms of Mother Base, but this wasn't the case for me. It's very similar to unlocking the final mission of Peace Walker, but not quite as rigid. Now, I've saved a lot of my analysis for the final part of this video, and that's because this mission changes the entire way that we look at the story of Metal Gear Solid 5. As the mission begins, we hear the narration, "V has come too." We then see Big Boss in the hospital right after the attack on Mother Base. Kaz is beside him, but Big Boss is flatlining. They manage to bring him back and make him stable. Kaz asks how he's doing, and they say that he's stabilized, but in a coma. He then asks the doctor, "What about him?" We realize that this camera is not an outside camera with an interesting angle, it's a first-person view of someone else, someone that isn't Big Boss. We then replay the prologue of the game, but things are a little different this time around. When the doctor is speaking to us about changing our appearance, this is far before the attack on the hospital. He shows us our current appearance, and we look just like the character that we created at the beginning of the game. He even shows us pictures of us, Snake, Miller, and the helicopter pilot. The doctor then goes through with the procedure and changes our face to look like Big Boss. It turns out that we were not playing Big Boss this whole time. We were playing a top soldier in MSF, one of Big Boss's top guys. We were made to look like Snake after the attack on Mother Base so that we could continue his legend, while he builds something else off in the shadows. We were meant to be him, to take his place while he plots. The other patient in the room, Ishmael, is actually Big Boss. He helped us get out, but after the ambulance crash, Snake was saved by Ocelot. He was given a motorcycle and a new identity so that he could escape. We were previously a medic in the service of MSF and actually dove in front of Big Boss during the helicopter crash to save his life. This rationale was used to justify us taking his place because we did it before, we would do it again. Before we get to the final scene of the game, I'd like to talk about the cassette tapes that we unlock after this mission. They're located in a section called Truth and effectively act as an epilogue for the game. They clear just about everything up and fill in all of the holes of the story. The first is a short conversation between Big Boss and Ocelot in the hospital while we were still in a coma. They talk about the plan to have us take over Big Boss's image. Ocelot was hypnotized into believing that we were the actual Big Boss, just in case he let something slip. Now he wouldn't be able to. We were also hypnotized, made to think that we were actually Big Boss.
All right, John. I've never forgotten you in these 9 years, but I have to forget you now. Adam, I'm counting on you.
Another tape sees Ocelot telling Big Boss about the clones that were created from the Les Enfants Terribles project.
I have nothing to say to him. Treat him like a human being, just another person.
Now, with this information in mind, it may make a bit more sense who Eli is. He actually is Liquid Snake, but the DNA test didn't match up because we weren't Big Boss. A few of the other tapes detail reports that were made to Big Boss while he was in the hospital. He was always kept in the loop. One details how the war economy will rule in the future, another notes how Cypher's control is growing, and another notes how Zero was attacked with a biological weapon. After Zero was attacked, he went into hiding. No one in the world can get into contact with him. Anderson is now basically running things at Cypher with Zero in the background. He's overseeing all of the AIs that they have making decisions.
It can only begin to decay. No mentality can last forever. When the body dies, the will dies with it.
We then get a variety of different tapes that are all secret recordings of different people meeting with Zero. We hear Paz meeting with Zero before she was sent to infiltrate MSF in Peace Walker. We hear Ocelot meeting with Zero and Zero giving him the order to keep Snake safe. It becomes clear throughout these tapes that Zero did not want Skullface to attack Mother Base. He did not support the attack and wants Snake to live. He never wanted to kill him by sneaking into his base and taking him out.
Look after Snake. He's the toughest son of a bitch I've ever known.
Another tape details a secret meeting between Miller and Zero. He gives Kaz a loose connection to Ocelot without exactly giving him Snake's location. He wants Kaz to be there to support Snake when he wakes up. We then hear a secret recording of a meeting between Zero and Skullface, a phone call. Zero is telling Skullface that he doesn't want to go forward with the parasites. He believes that controlling information will be the way forward. He's also more concerned with genetics research, but Skullface has sent Zero a pin as a gift. This pin turns out to be poison. This was how Skullface got to Zero. He tortured Paz at Camp Omega and got his location out of her, and then sent him a poison pin. Zero then had to go into hiding. The last conversation that we hear on these tapes is one between Zero and Snake, but it's really just a one-way conversation because Snake still hasn't woken up. Zero remembers the last time he visited Snake in the hospital, when the boss broke his arm. He tells Big Boss that he'll have to go into hiding because Skullface gave him a sickness.
I'll be somewhere even you can't find me. A tombstone chiseled into the code of a machine. That is all I leave to mark my existence. Wake up soon, old friend. Time is running short.
These tapes make it clear that even though Zero became the villain of the series, he did have good intentions at one point. He had some line to be drawn in the sand. He had honor. He wanted an honorable war between himself and Big Boss, and at the end of the day, this man was his friend. They had their differences, but when it all came down to it, there wasn't ill will there. He didn't want him dead, especially not at the hands of someone as ruthless as Skullface. But obviously the biggest reveal from this whole thing is that we're not playing Big Boss. We're playing us, Venom Snake. Technically a completely different character than Big Boss, a different person that we've never seen before. The final scene of the game changes all that. We see Venom Snake, our character, at a sink in front of a mirror. This is the same mirror that we saw at the beginning of the game, and the same tape that we saw from the man who sold the world. Venom has flashbacks to that night on the helicopter, realizing his true place there. This tape is from Big Boss, the real Big Boss, to Venom Snake. And before we talk about it, I just like to let the full thing play.
Now do you remember who you are? What you were meant to do? I cheated death thanks to you. And thanks to you, I've left my mark. You have too. You've written your own history. You're your own man. I'm Big Boss. And you are too. No. He's the two of us together. Where we are today, we built it. This story, this legend, it's ours. We can change the world and with it, the future. I am you, and you are me. Carry that with you wherever you go. Thank you, my friend. From here on out, you're Big Boss.
What follows is shots of the tape's other title, Operation Intrude N313. If you remember correctly, this was the operation from the original Metal Gear. This means that Venom Snake is currently at Outer Heaven. He was there when Snake infiltrated the base, not Big Boss. He was there on the MSX, not Big Boss. This message on the tape is not only a message from Big Boss to Venom Snake, passing down the torch and noting the importance of his role in this whole thing, but more importantly, it's a message from Kojima to us, to his fans. How many people playing this game or watching this video grew up playing the Metal Gear games? How many people aged and had an entire life in the times that these games were released? This is effectively Kojima telling us that we are Big Boss now. I also haven't even mentioned the fact that David Hayter did not voice Snake in The Phantom Pain. Venom Snake was actually voiced by Kiefer Sutherland. I have pretty mixed feelings about this because on one hand, it really feels like a classic Kojima subversion to change out the actor knowing that fans would be upset, and then later revealing it was because the actor voices a different character. But I think it could have been done better, honestly. My idea for a better implementation would have been to have Sutherland voice Big Boss and Venom Snake all the way until the Final Truth mission. When we run through the prologue again, Big Boss is voiced by David Hayter, in addition to the final tape. You could rationalize this by saying that Venom wasn't in his right mind in the hospital. Maybe the hypnosis had done something to his brain and he didn't want to hear Big Boss's voice. But this would all tie nicely back into the theme of language and voice. I don't think Sutherland did a bad job as Venom either. It's definitely a different approach to a character who is effectively Big Boss for a while, and it probably fits the atmosphere that this game was going for anyways. But before we move on, I'd like to return to the tape scene for a moment because it's pretty important. As we've talked about many times throughout this series, Kojima's goal with these games was always to pass this series on to the next generation. And not just to pass the series on to the next generation, but to pass the things that he has learned to the next generation. He tried to do this with Metal Gear Solid 2. Not only the core message of the game displayed this, but also the fact that he wanted to pass the series on to another team. The third game in the series reflecting this once again, trying to pass things on to other people. And the fourth game was, at its core, about his struggles with leaving the series and his conflicting emotions at having to return. And with MGS5, this goal was complete. Kojima didn't have to pass the series on to another team, he gave it to us. For one entry, he truly allowed us to be Big Boss. He allowed us to fill these shoes, to become a character that we all loved, to become a legend. And just in the same way that the game manages to close the circle on the story of Metal Gear by wrapping it back into the first game, it also closes the circle of Kojima's goals with the series. And this scene couldn't be any more touching. It's gut-wrenching when viewed through this lens, especially with the knowledge of what Kojima was going through with the series at the time, the conflicts with Konami, the disputes, and ultimately the unfair treatment. The other thing that clearly reflects this feeling is the deja vu mission in Ground Zeroes, and the side objective that sees us erasing the previous Metal Gear Solid logos. Kaz says something pretty interesting.
Good. You erased a marking. Looks like there's more of them. You might be able to erase the markings, but the memories will never disappear.
These two things, along with the overarching theme of the game itself, makes this genuinely feel like it was Kojima's goodbye from the series. It was his passing things off to the fans and giving a genuine thank you for playing his games all these years. And this brings us to the largest theme of the Phantom Pain, the title itself. The title, The Phantom Pain, has a lot of meanings. The most clear and obvious is that phantom pain is a real syndrome that is seen in people who lose their limbs. It actually occurs in over half of people who lose an appendage on their body. It isn't always expressed as pain. Sometimes it can just be a simple itching feeling, but the brain signals are mixed and confused, and it feels to the person as if the limb is still there. And obviously, Snake and Miller have both lost limbs in this game. They note their experience with phantom pain, but there's a clear and obvious symbol here, that it's not just the pain of their missing limbs, it's the pain of everything they lost. Snake and Miller have the phantom pain around Mother Base and their comrades. Snake also has this deeper guilt and pain around Paz. There's even an extra set of hidden cutscenes that can be unlocked, where Paz is on Mother Base reminiscing over memories of MSF, but we eventually realize that this is just Snake's brain playing tricks on him. It's also a pretty good representation of how he decides to eventually move on. Code Talker has the phantom pain of losing his culture and people. Skullface has the phantom pain of losing his language and his home. Quiet has the phantom pain of losing her ability to speak. Everyone here has some sort of phantom pain, and I've even seen some people relate this to the game itself. The fans have the phantom pain of losing the franchise, but they also have the phantom pain of Chapter 3. So something we have yet to talk about is the real end to Metal Gear Solid 5. What, you thought that this scene in the Truth Mission, or those cassette tapes, or the post-credit scene with Ocelot and Miller was it? No. Technically, there's one more cutscene in the game that can be found only when all of the nukes in the game are disarmed. So we haven't really talked about the online mode to Metal Gear Solid 5, but in my opinion, it's the best one in the series that I've had the chance to play. Most of the game is naturally connected to the online mode of the game. You don't have to connect to this mode, of course, but if you do, you'll get access to daily challenge tasks, which you can complete to earn rewards. You'll be able to get more resources, build more FOBs, develop higher tiers of weapons, enter into automatically decided PF battles, and even infiltrate other FOBs. The FOB infiltration part is probably the main core of the online mode. Here we can infiltrate another user's base, with the ultimate goal of getting to the core of their platform. If we do this, we're rewarded with soldiers that have volunteered to join our base, and a variety of resources. This can be difficult or easy depending on the level of the base that we're infiltrating. Some bases will have no defenses at all, and others will have cameras, drones, manned guns, and upgraded soldiers. The level of defense that you have for your base is dependent on how high your security team level is and the upgrades that you choose to develop. While infiltrating someone's base, you can also wander around and steal resources from them, and even steal one of their nukes if they've created one. So you can create nukes in the game, which requires a ton of resources and a bit of development time. At some point, data miners found that there was a title card for a third chapter in the game called Peace. Data miners also found a secret cutscene that would appear only after nuclear disarmament had been achieved. This cutscene shows Miller giving a speech to the Diamond Dogs, a speech for winning the war on nuclear peace. No nukes remain in the world, but how long this will last, no one can know. The cutscene ultimately finishes with the original excerpt from the end of Metal Gear Solid 1, noting how many nukes were left in the world at the time. We get an updated figure that is now ultimately decreased, but it isn't quite over yet. Now, like I said, this cutscene would only play once nuclear disarmament was achieved. This would mean that all of the nukes that were created on one platform of the game were disarmed. This, of course, seemed like an impossible task because there were a lot of nukes created already, and especially on places like the Steam server, there were still a ton of people playing the game. Groups eventually formed to try and disarm every nuke in the game, and groups also formed to try and stop that from happening. Eventually, a few successful disarmaments were achieved, but they were all through faulty means, so Konami considered that cheating rather than a real way of achieving this task. They basically don't consider that it happened legitimately. There was one group that everyone thought achieved disarmament on the PS3, but it turned out they had a hacker in the group who was automatically finding nukes in player bases and transferring them to himself by using a program. To this day, this task has never been achieved legitimately, and honestly, it doesn't ever seem like it was meant to be possible. One of the members of the anti-nuke gang actually said that they found that there were a group of 40 or so nukes that were created by Konami that were not on any platform. They could not be disarmed, so this task is effectively impossible. Now, why was this such a big deal? Well, a lot of people got the idea that nuclear disarmament would unlock a third chapter of the game titled Peace. This was because of the aforementioned data-mined title card. The flames of this theory were also fueled by an unreleased episode called Episode 51, Kingdom of the Flies. The concept art for this mission and the unfinished cutscenes were released on a bonus content disc that came with the PS4 Collector's Edition of the game. There's not a ton of stuff here, it's just a mission where Snake is sent to locate the escaped kids along with Eli and Sahelanthropus as they found themselves hiding out on an island. They've created their own kingdom here, something akin to Lord of the Flies. Eli is protected by the floating boy as Cypher soldiers head in to take him out. He pilots Sahelanthropus and takes out the soldiers, but now he wants to kill Snake as well. We were supposed to have another battle against the machine, and once it was taken out, Eli was defeated. Snake ends up saving him from the soldiers, but his head injury causes him to not be able to differentiate between red and white. Since Eli is wearing a white suit, Snake accidentally shoots him. Eli doesn't die though, he's just injured. Snake wants to take him to the chopper to fix him up, but he's already showing symptoms of the English vocal cord parasite. He laments the fact that he's only a copy of Big Boss and vows to take them all out. And instead of shooting Eli, Snake leaves him with a gun. The parasite is then removed from Eli by Psycho Mantis, and the two are ready to take on the world, to break the curse of his genes. Now, the main theory with this whole thing is that Chapter 3 was hidden behind nuclear disarmament, or that it was never really finished before Kojima was exiled from the company, and this piece of the game is just lost to time, that Metal Gear Solid 5 was ultimately an unfinished game. Now, my opinion on this is that the Chapter 3 theory is probably not true. I don't think there ever was a real Chapter 3. The title card that we see in the files either wasn't supposed to be there, or it was just a small reward reward for getting all the nukes disarmed, which also probably wasn't supposed to be achieved. With the nukes, it seems like the message is supposed to be that peace, at least when it comes to nukes specifically, is never entirely achievable. The system is rigged against us, and we will probably never be in a world entirely without nukes. I mean, if you view the online mode of MGS5 as a social experiment, then look at what happened when people started to try and unite to get rid of the nukes. People already started to mobilize to try and stop them. There will always be people that want to keep conflict around. There will always be reasons to have nukes and to push off peace. But that doesn't mean that we stop fighting. That doesn't mean that the battle is lost. And in my opinion, episode 51 was probably just a cut episode. It probably just didn't fit in with the rest of the narrative, and fighting Sahelanthropus again maybe just didn't seem like it was that necessary. Also, the fact that this was supposed to take place on a completely different area, on a new island, means that the team would have needed to dedicate a lot of time and resources to one mission. Nearing the end of development, the decision was probably made to cut that area so that it didn't make the game take even longer to make than it already had. There's also this narrative that I see often online that Metal Gear Solid 5's story is unfinished, that there are so many things that are left unanswered or not tied up at the end of it. I just don't really think this is true at all. For starters, Venom Snake's story is completely finished. He goes into Outer Heaven, defends the base against Solid Snake, and dies in the process. He fulfills his duty in carrying on Big Boss's legacy and allows the real Big Boss to come out of hiding in Metal Gear 2. Miller's story seems wrapped up to me. He has learned at least something, that he can't carry the weight of grief as much as he has been. He can't seek vengeance in all ways and all forms. In the post-credit scene of the game, he vows to build up Venom Snake, and when the time comes, Big Boss's son. He's still holding on to his grievances, but it has wrapped his story back up to when we would once again see him in Metal Gear 2. Ocelot's is wrapped up in much the same way as Kaz's. He chooses to support the other son of Big Boss and inevitably go to war with Kaz in the future, which they sort of do in MGS1. Quiet's story is entirely wrapped up, as she has decided to live a life of solitude once again to keep herself from harming others that she might care about. Eli and Psycho Mantis would obviously go on to return in MGS1, and even the Kingdom of the Flies mission is a bit unnecessary. We know who they are, and the game tells us. We don't really need to see this final scene. The only thing it really does is clear up how Eli gets rid of the parasites. Volgin has died after attempting to get his revenge on what he thought was Big Boss. Skullface is dead. Zero is in hiding, building his AI network that would reemerge later in the timeline. It's all basically there. The ending is there. What more does this story really need? But I do sympathize with people from the period when this game was released. To give the situation some more context, Kojima eventually officially announced that he was leaving Konami. After the whole build-up, after all the drama and speculation, he left the company to pursue his own independent studio titled Kojima Productions. And this was a definitive answer to whether we would ever be getting another Kojima Metal Gear game. For most fans, this meant that the series was over. It was done. So I can understand people endlessly speculating about what's to come. Maybe there was more. Maybe there was something there that we didn't realize or didn't unlock. Maybe Kojima left one final message for us along the way. But this was probably it. And that's a Phantom Pain of its own origin, whether intentional or not, if the shoe fits. And it doesn't matter if Kojima meant to put the message in Ground Zeroes because he knew he was on his way out, or if PT being a game about a controlling father going crazy and murdering a family was actually a metaphor for Konami taking his creation away from him, or if the Phantom Pain was meant to be some big experimental metaphor about passing things on to those that care about your series most. It's what happened anyways, and sometimes coincidence creates stronger sentiments than purpose. We do technically have one more game in the Metal Gear series to talk about, but before I do, I'd like to end this section with a short quote from Kojima on the Metal Gear Solid 5 novelization. But when they were making those songs, all that was before their eyes was a blank space. When they tried to walk, there was a frozen winter. Despite that, face the coldness of winter. Go towards the blank space. There is a blank space, but it will not be filled. In that blank space, there is always a hero. Because there is a blank space, you can advance ahead. It is this blank space exactly that is V. With the release of Metal Gear Solid 5, Kojima and Konami announced that the director would be leaving the company. It was never truly confirmed whether this split was one-sided or mutual, but much of the speculation was finally put to bed. Kojima would be going on to create his own studio to work on new games, in particular, one with Sony. But Konami didn't wait long to announce another game in the Metal Gear franchise without Kojima. During Gamescom 2016, Metal Gear Survive was revealed. Much of Kojima Productions would leave Konami with him to go work at his new studio, namely longtime series artist Yoji Shinkawa and Kenichiro Imaizumi, who had worked as a producer for most of the series. But this doesn't mean that all of his team left. A lot of members chose to stay behind and continue working at Konami. There was no guarantee, after all, that Kojima Productions would even work out. Metal Gear Survive was directed by Youta Tsutsumizaki, who had done planning and level design on Metal Gear Solid 5, Ground Zeroes, and Peace Walker. Gakuto Mikumo, who wrote the story for Portable Ops, would return to create the narrative for this entry. Masaya Kobayashi, who had worked on Metal Gear Solid 2, 3, 4, and Revengeance, would return as cinematic director. And Konami even got Masahiro Ito involved in the role of creature designer. But just because Kojima was gone doesn't mean that they couldn't continue the Metal Gear series, right? There were good spin-off games that weren't directed by Kojima, so that at least proves that this was possible. Metal Gear Survive was released on February 20th, 2018 in North America, February 21st, 2018 in Japan, and February 22nd, 2018 in the PAL region. Metal Gear Survive actually takes place pretty close to the end of Ground Zeroes. We see some new shots of the destruction of Mother Base and the cleanup crew that was in charge of the aftermath. Our character, which we create and customize ourselves, was killed in the attack on Mother Base and almost sucked into a wormhole that opened over it. His arm was severed in the process, and he now has some sort of connection to the world where the wormhole went. A UN officer named Goodluck puts us in charge of traveling to this other world so that we can rescue the soldiers that were stranded there and so that we can find a cure to our condition. If the condition goes on for too long, we'll be turned into a wanderer, basically a walking zombie with a crystal on its head. Our character travels to this world and meets an XOF soldier named Reeve while being chased by wanderers. We eventually find the remnants of Mother Base that were sucked into this wormhole and an AI pod that got stranded here as well. This AI pod's name is Virgil, and it's been sort of split into two parts, one that's malfunctioning and one that's a bit more reasonable. Our goal on this planet, which is called Dite, is to collect lost memory boards from the previous expedition that was here. In turn, this will give the AI more information about their expedition and will allow us to eventually build a wormhole back home. This leads us into the basic concept and gameplay loop for Metal Gear Survive. We have a home base that is very close to the remnants of Mother Base that we found when arriving here. Our goal is to build up and defend this base while also venturing out to get supplies, managing our hunger and thirst, and completing main missions. Metal Gear Survive is obviously a survival game. We can craft, we can build, collect, cook, etc. So what's the normal loop of Metal Gear Survive? Generally, we head out from our base on an expedition into the world. Out here, we can visit various points of interest to collect resources, kill wanderers, which, when salvaged, will give us Kuban energy, an incredibly important resource in the game, or complete main missions. We then head back to base, use our new resources to craft better equipment, cook food to ensure our hunger doesn't drop, grab some more defenses, and maybe even level up, heading back out once again. This general loop is extremely repetitive, but let's hammer down in on those specific sections. So what does going out into the world look like? First of all, a lot of this world is covered in a thick mist that we can't traverse without an oxygen machine. This tank will provide us oxygen while inside of the mist, and if we run out of it, then we run the risk of dying. We can refill this oxygen with Kuban energy, which is also used to craft, build, and to level up. So this makes journeying into the mist dangerous, and it's even more dangerous because there are far more wanderers in the mist than there are outside of it. The scales are balanced though because the rewards in here, in the form of resources, materials, and items, are much higher. Now, what exactly are my problems with this system? Well, there's a few. First of all, repeatedly journeying out and looking for resources becomes really tedious in this game. It's just so repetitive, and the game does try to shake things up by providing you ruins to delve through that are a bit more closely designed than the outside world, or giving you side quests to rescue people, but after the 5-hour mark, it just becomes so boring. And on top of that, the early game combat in this game is terrible. So we can actually place objects mostly anywhere in the world as long as we've already crafted them. If we want to place a fence in front of enemies to bottleneck them, we can. It'll just materialize before our eyes. In the beginning of the game, we really don't have much outside of a spear to fight enemies with. So putting up a fence and then just stabbing enemies repeatedly is the main way to approach combat for quite a while. And this is just so damn tedious. Sure, there are some stealth mechanics. It's a Metal Gear game after all, so we can sneak around big hordes, but you're incentivized to kill the Wanderers because they give you Kuban energy. This energy is extremely valuable, so you want to gather as much as you can. The only problem with this is that you have to salvage it from the corpses of Wanderers, and God, it takes forever. If you kill a horde of 30 of these guys, then you're going to be sitting here salvaging for quite a while, and there's really no reason for this. If we've killed all the enemies, why not just let us have the resource? Why put a time constraint on this? Once we do unlock a bow and some guns, the game gets a little less tedious when it comes to combat, but starting out, things are incredibly annoying. Also, a lot of the upgrades in the game come really slow, which the game incentivizes you to speed up by spending money. You can buy in-game coins with real cash and then use it to get basically a double XP boost, which doubles all of your Kuban energy that you receive. We'll also have to unlock transporters in the world, which allow us to go from place to place, making it easier to travel into the mist and out of it. One pro that I will give the game is that I actually genuinely like the Lord of Dust. There's this character that becomes the big antagonist for the game, which is revealed about halfway through. He's this massive, freakish monster, and you can encounter him out in the mist naturally. You may not even be able to see him at first, just hear his incredibly loud footfalls through the mist. Maybe you'll just see its shadow, but it's this really good and very effective intensity. Another layer added to the expedition, making it that much more treacherous. The designs of all the enemies are actually pretty well done, probably having something to do with Masahiro Ito being involved. This man just loves to do creature designs for bad games. The next step of the gameplay loop is the crafting. Coming back to base sees us leveling up using our Kuban energy, which allows us to put our points into a skill tree, either giving us new skills or increasing our stats. Most of these skills that we can get just fucking suck, especially at the point in the game that we're mostly using arrows and bullets. Like, by this time, why the hell am I buying a skill that gives me an extra attack with a heavy weapon? It all just feels so slow, once again pushing you towards buying a boost. And then, of course, we have to manage hunger and thirst. We mostly do this through hunting animals, taking their meat and cooking it. We get water by collecting dirty water and purifying it. Again, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but it's all just so damn tedious. Why do I want to focus on my hunger here? If you give me a system you want me to interact with, running around the mist and getting resources, why are you preventing me from interacting with it by forcing me to go somewhere else to hunt gerbils and shit? A lot of the times, the upgrades to equipment don't really feel like we're making upgrades. We might use too many resources in a battle, like ammunition or fences, and then we don't have enough resources to craft replacements. So we either go into the next mission weaker, or have to spend more time getting resources to craft those things. There's also a large part of the game that deals with the defense of areas. This comes mostly in two forms, defending teleporters or defending our own base. Out in the mist, we find teleporters that we can activate to take us back to base. These are valuable because walking all the way out of the mist every time our oxygen is drained is a slog. Plus, they help us transport other people that we might rescue in the mist without their oxygen draining. We usually have to defend these while they activate, which means setting up defenses like gates or walls to hold off the enemies, and even put them in position for good kills. We can set all kinds of traps as long as we can make them, and once the defense is finished, the enemies are wiped out. The one advantage to defenses is that if we kill enemies during them, they're automatically salvaged, so we don't have to sit and cut the crystals out of their bodies. We will also have to defend our base at certain points in the story, which involves setting up defenses from all sides and pushing off waves and waves of enemies. The defenses aren't too bad overall. There's actually an online mode where you can participate in these larger defense missions, and you'll get huge rewards for them. At a certain point in the game, it kind of feels like you have to do them, otherwise you're going to be stuck grinding for hours in the campaign. And this leads me back to my biggest problem with Metal Gear Survive. It's just not Metal Gear at all. This is at least a passable survival game. And I know I just shit on it a lot, but most of that was from the perspective of the Metal Gear series. If this game had nothing to do with Metal Gear, I'd probably just think it was fine, but because it's in the Metal Gear universe, it's naturally held to a different standard. And it's odd because Metal Gear Solid 5 has a ton of mechanics that shouldn't really work. The base building thing as a whole really feels like a mobile game, but because of the way it's integrated into the story, because of the way it fits thematically, and because of the way it's balanced, it just works. It's satisfying to use, the upgrades feel worth it, everything feels like it gels together really well. Metal Gear Survive has mobile game mechanics, but in the worst way possible. This game feels like the premise was built around the idea rather than the other way around. It wasn't, here's a really good story that's faithful to the Metal Gear legacy, let's make a game. It was, we need to make a story that rationalizes why we would ever be making a survival game in the Metal Gear universe. And it goes without saying, but the story is just awful. And no, I'm not just saying that because Kojima isn't involved. There were games with good stories in the Metal Gear series that weren't written by Kojima. The writing for Metal Gear Survive is terrible. It's trying to do a similar triple cross backstab espionage thing, but none of it really makes sense, and you don't even care anyways. None of the characters are interesting enough to latch onto, none of the consequences of the story really matter. It's all just garbage. And it's a shame because this was the last game in the Metal Gear saga. If we aren't counting remaster collections and remakes, this was the last game to grace the franchise. On top of that, the game used the Fox engine, which you probably could have figured out yourself. It honestly also seems to reuse a ton of assets from MGS5 and just call it a day. Some of the watchtowers and bases just feel a bit too familiar. This game was obviously just a cheap way to try and capitalize off the Metal Gear name after Kojima had left. And clearly Konami were trying to get some use out of the Fox engine after they had just invested a ton of money into its development. Sadly, this amazing engine would not be used again outside of a few more soccer games. And at the end of the day, the game isn't great, but it's not the game itself that makes it feel like a disgrace to the Metal Gear name, it's the entire situation. Kojima had left his last mark on his time at Konami with this massive, epic, and personal masterpiece, a game that interweaved themes of loss, grief, vengeance, language, control, and parasites, a game that acted as Kojima's last message to the fans of his series, a game that was so well crafted, it's infinitely replayable to this day, a game that left fans wondering if it would ever return. And you follow that up with the most shallow, egregious, desperate attempt at a cash grab, just to try and make a few dollars after your star developer has left the show. Maybe it was better that Konami would take a few years and just try to develop mobile games. Metal Gear Survive would not do well with critics. With a 60 on Metacritic and a 1.5 user score, people were not happy with the way the series was trending. And the game didn't seem to be very successful either. From only the numbers I could find, it doesn't even look like it broke 1 million units. And with the response to this entry, Konami would take an extended break from the franchise, leaving Metal Gear Survive as the last entry in a dead series. Metal Gear Solid 5 is a game that will most likely forever be mired in controversy. Before it was even released, rumblings of its downfall had already begun. Regardless of how it performed, it was connected to one of the biggest creators in gaming, leaving his series permanently. On top of that, rumors of the game being unfinished and not complete still persist to this day. But when you make a point to look past the controversy, what is there is something truly beautiful. I see a lot of people say that Metal Gear Solid 5 is perfect Metal Gear gameplay with a disaster of a main story. It's worth playing, but the story isn't worth paying attention to. I really just can't agree with this. The way the game handles themes of grief, revenge, and loss are all unique to it. It doesn't fall into the classic trap of repeating the same old revenge fables over and over. On top of that, it deals with themes that I rarely see discussed in video games at all. The symbol of parasites cling to this game. They're everywhere. And whether this is a metaphor for the parasitization of developed countries on the rest of the world, or a metaphor for companies sucking money out of the creativity of the artists they hire, it's still incredibly interesting. The game also makes a point to speak a lot about language and the control of language. English has spread as a language, but something not often spoken about is how words begin to lose their meaning over time. And in this way, we're all robbed of some type of expression, left with no way to say the things we want to. And when language is controlled, it's easier to control the people. And a lot of this comes from Kojima's influences here. 1984 is a clear one when speaking about language, but also Moby Dick. References to the novel are plastered throughout the game. Ahab, Ishmael, Pequod, a giant flaming whale in the sky. Remember that part of the book? But the game also references whaling vessels quite a lot, and the cassette tapes make a point to note the world's declining interest in whaling, how viewing it from outside the culture makes it seem unjust. And the characters and moments we get with them are some of the greatest in the series. Quiet barely speaks a word, but her final speech is one of the loudest. Miller's character, in its complete 180 from the first game, gives us a shocking whiplash into a dark and brutal existence for those that are still left post-catastrophe. But at the end of the day, the best thing that this game does is allow the player to become a part of its world. The gameplay is honestly peak Metal Gear. I replayed the game on PC for this review, and I just can't keep myself from playing it. I keep infiltrating FOBs, spending time S-ranking missions, developing higher grade weapons, taking part in events. It's just so well done, and the gameplay is probably the best it's ever been. But we don't just get to be a part of this world in the sense that we inhabit it through combat and stealth. The game allows us to make our mark on this world, to create a base, to play the way that we want to, and to become a part of its story, to become a part of its history. We built this base. We found these soldiers. We rallied them together. We are Diamond Dogs.
You're all diamonds.
And with that, this is the end of my series on Metal Gear Solid. The series would go out with one final bang, followed by a sad, pathetic whimper. But wait, we can't leave it like that. We can't end this series on such a sour note. It would be disrespectful to Kojima's legacy to not try and find the silver lining here, because when it comes down to it, this story has a happy ending.